In the beginning, Origin had Ultima. Ultima led the pack because Origin never settled. When they came up with a truly great idea, they didn't stick around and exploit it until it overstayed its welcome. No, they left that to their competitors. Instead, they'd look for blue oceans of opportunity elsewhere. Slaying innocents for experience points, are you? How about a game where victory is contingent on you being a good person? Think you got all those virtues figured out, huh? Well, now those same virtues are being used as tools for evil. No one concept, no matter how clever or well realized, was mined to the point of depletion. Throughout the series' many entries, its core mechanics never became tired or cliché because they were never given a chance to. In the beginning, Origin had Ultima, and Ultima stood alone. But from great ideas come inspiration, and before too long, Origin's competition was fierce. The beauty of working in a young medium tied so closely with changing technology is that your once impossible ideas become attainable in real time. The ugly side of that same industry is the ballooning resources needed to realize those ambitions. Nothing changes our relationship to the world around us quite like money, having it or needing it. It was 1992. Origin was struggling to find balance between the artistic integrity that had made the company what it was and its increasing financial needs. And so a serpent entered the garden, offering Origin's management a $35 million fruit. And lo, how sweet it must have tasted to those famished employees. Ultima VII Part 2 Serpent Isle was Origin's proving ground, the first of the projects to be released after the company had become acquired by Electronic Arts. When the game was finally released after numerous delays, cuts, and production issues, it was a technical mess. The soul of Ultima was still clearly present, but Serpent Isle was just too ambitious for its own good. For EA, it was a lesson learned. Origin needs a firm hand. This was bad news for the boots-on-the-ground employees of Origin. Budgets were limited, personnel were shuffled, and teams were restricted in ways that only made sense to a group of people in a boardroom somewhere. It was almost impossible to get a non-Ultima, non-Wing Commander project off the ground. Even then, EA's confidence in Ultima was beginning to wane. The CRPG is dead, so said the gaming press around this time. The March 1994 issue of Computer Gaming World featured an article stating, "Probably one of the saddest sights over the last couple of years has been the rapid decline of computer role-playing games. The emphasis is on bigger on-screen characters with more realistic animations in a smaller game world. This seems to be part of a design philosophy which says that computer gamers don't want to play big games any longer." On the cover of that very same issue, Doom. Doom, 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 Doom. Wolfenstein, Doom, and the many games that followed in their footsteps were the future. Fast, exciting action games that were easy to pick up and play, but satisfying to master and infinitely replayable. The adventure game, now utilizing full-motion video, was the genre of choice for those who enjoyed story-heavy titles. More than ever, Japanese culture was also percolating in the West. The JRPG thus continued to kick the CRPG's ass. Japanese RPGs were less opaque and more narratively driven, delivering exciting melodrama through cool, identifiable characters with huge swords. Titles like Secret of Mana would blend RPG trappings with real-time action gameplay. Even turn-based games like Final Fantasy would opt for active-time battle gauges, making for more intense, fast-paced combat that appealed to those outside the usual RPG niche. FPS and adventure games could easily leverage evolving technology, but CRPGs faced a huge obstacle: scale. The genre had begun as an attempt to take D&D's vast worlds, epic journeys, and character progression and put it on the home computer. Voice acting would mean pre-written characters, fancy 3D graphics would mean smaller environments. It wasn't what the CRPG stood for, and it was unclear how the genre was going to move forward. A microcosm of this time and place was SSI. Strategic Simulations Inc. had at one time been a CRPG juggernaut. Now it was producing flop after flop. Games like Spelljammer, Legends of Valor, and Menzo Baranzin became infamous for their middling quality. The company also hopped aboard the SS3DO with exclusives like Slayer and Deathkeep, unaware of the horrible iceberg that awaited them all. SSI had long enjoyed the exclusive rights to make games based on the D&D IP, becoming a quintessential CRPG giant in the 80s with their gold box games. Now, they were becoming the butt of jokes. Even when they released something worthwhile, their reputation preceded them. A writer for Game Bytes magazine included this line in his review for Al-Qadim, The Genie's Curse. Through some cosmic alignment of planets or other miracle, SSI has managed to produce a worthwhile game. With its confidence eroded, TSR, who held the D&D license, ended their relationship with SSI and granted the D&D license to several other publishers. This was an age of giants falling, and quickly. Companies like Sierra enjoyed tremendous success thanks to their diversification. Seeing the tide turning, they'd invested in new technology, expanded their operations to Japan, and acquired a glut of small studios, much like EA had done. It seemed like the future of the industry was consolidation. For every successful independent venture like id Software, there was about 100 small fries forced to join the publisher Borg or perish. In hindsight, one can't help but wonder what fate may have been preferable. All of these changes were part of a broader industry shift towards 3D graphics and full-motion video, both of which seemed inevitable at this point. That transition wasn't so smooth for everyone. The bread and butter of veteran artists and programmers had been 2D sprite-based graphics. Sound engineers who'd gotten their start making beeps and boops with the Apple II Mockingbird now had Red Book audio to work with. As if overnight, publishers were demanding games that required an entirely new skill set. Game design wasn't seen as its own discipline per se, but with years of RPGs and action games under their belt, developers intuitively understood what worked and what didn't, or at least they had. There was much chaos and enthusiasm surrounding these industry changes. Faster CPUs, powerful new consoles, murmurs of dedicated graphics hardware for consumer PCs. Big businesses were bullish on tech that hadn't really been stress tested yet, and as a result, it was hard to cut through the noise. When Myst popped off, everyone rushed to make a game just like Myst. When Doom popped off, everyone made games just like Doom. Publishers wanted the next big thing, but the next big thing always seemed to come out of left field. Developers struggled to adapt, figuring out how to update their games for a new age. Sometimes they bombed, other times they succeeded, but even then it was unclear if games were selling because they were good or just because they were impressive. For publishers, it didn't seem to matter a whole lot. At Origin, as usual, things were in flux. This wasn't just due to the widespread industry changes, but the constant restructuring happening in their own halls. The company's workforce had more than doubled since the acquisition, despite many key people leaving. This made for teams largely staffed by new recruits, with oversight from some less than beloved figures. Robert Garriott, who had co-founded Origin with his brother Richard, had left the company to work with EA as its executive vice president. It made sense. Robert may have run a video game company, but he was a dyed-in-the-wool businessman. He lived for board meetings and bar charts. But his exit undoubtedly came at a cost. Robert's influence at Origin was understated but critical. Robert tempered expectations, kept scope manageable, and understood trends well enough to call Richard's more outrageous ideas into question. To quote Warren Spector, "Without Robert, it really would have been the inmates running the asylum, and it wouldn't have worked." EA, likely realizing the effect of Robert's absence, knew that Origin would have to be kept in check. Now, some of the EA staff that Richard answered to, like Bing Gordon, were more understanding of the pressure that Origin was facing. But for the most part, Electronic Arts was a cutthroat organization to be a subsidiary of. Origin was being turned into a competitive and political environment. Workers were divided into teams who seldom interacted with one another. Meanwhile, team leads were forced to angle for financial resources, inevitably screwing over another team in the process. As longtime Origin artist Denis Loubet said, "As production groups became more insular, Origin fractured. That was the death of Origin culture. It didn't help that each production head was a dictator over his team, yet each had to brown-nose EA for funding." No small part of this brave new world was the involvement of a prominent EA manager, Don Mattrick. As EA's faith in Origin was tested, Mattrick was brought in, effectively, as a babysitter. He was there to improve Origin's efficiency and keep its various teams on task. According to the 2005 escapist article, The Conquest of Origin, some of OSI's employees anonymously expressed a belief that Matrix's motives were nefarious. His career with EA had begun in '91, when his game company, Distinctive Software, was acquired by EA for $11 million. Having started his own company and studied university-level economics at 17 years old, Mattrix was born for this sort of thing. But much like every other company under the EA umbrella, Distinctive Software, soon to become EA Canada, was looking for that sweet EA financing. Every penny earned by Origin was a penny that Distinctive wasn't going to get. So some have alleged that Mattrix had a vested interest in making sure as few of Origin's projects as possible were greenlit. As Origin employee Steve Powers put it, "It went from a nerdy fraternity to business." And business it was. EA's socks hadn't exactly been knocked off by a whole lot that Origin had done. 1993 had them hedging their bets on Serpent Isle, and, to a much greater degree, Strike Commander. It was gonna be the next big Origin IP, helmed by Chris Roberts, whose Wing Commander games were about the only thing EA seemed to be interested in. Unfortunately, neither Serpent Isle nor Strike Commander made much of a splash. Shadowcaster, which released the same year, was published by Origin but developed by Raven Software. It was created with the Wolfenstein 3D engine, licensed from id, and it was an interesting blend of light role-playing and FPS action. It drew some favorable comparisons to Ultima Underworld, but came nowhere close to that game's success. Few could, as Origin continued to headline their product catalogs with Underworld, now years after its initial release. Smart money on EA's part continued to be on Wing Commander, and so it was Wing Commander galore. Wing Commander Academy, Wing Commander Privateer, Wing Commander Armada. Origin pumped out Wing Commanders pretty much as fast as they could humanly make them. It's anyone's guess how well some of these spin-off titles sold, but with quick turnover and recyclable technology, they were undoubtedly profitable. Privateer in particular sold 50,000 copies domestically in its first month, not too shabby as far as quick cash injections go. All eyes were on Wing Commander, particularly its upcoming third mainline game. This was going to be a hit, it had to be. If Wing Commander 3 couldn't live up to expectations, Origin would be facing the same uncertainty that EA had seemingly rescued them from not 2 years ago. As far as justifying themselves as an investment, there was only one other game that could even come close to Wing Commander 3's importance, and that was Ultima VIII. The game was quite a significant investment for EA, especially compared to Serpent Isle. The 8th game's development team was the biggest of any Ultima yet, with over 30 staff members, including longtime Ultima veterans like Herman Miller and Denis Loubet. The development environment was very different from that of Serpent Isle. That game was put together by a motley crew, plenty of new faces and employees pulled from other departments. Talented individuals led by the venerable Warren Spector, but a patchwork crew, early victims of EA's structural overhauls. Ultima VIII, however, was a mainline game, and although the Blackgate sales weren't comparable to those of Wing Commander, the Ultima name still had pull. Even the upcoming Doom 2 would have to pay its respects, declaring, "Thou hast lost an eighth" when the game is quit, referencing the player's moral failings in Ultima 4. Underworld was still a hot title, and constant re-releases of previous Ultimas introduced new players to the series. Ultima, for as inconsistent as its sales had been throughout the 90s, was one of the big names EA was paying for when they bought Origin. So Ultima VIII was not lacking for resources. What it was lacking was a commodity that seemed to be in real short supply these days: time. See, while Serpent Isle reused the Blackgate's development tools, the 8th game, as was tradition for numbered Ultima entries, would feature an entirely new engine. In a break from the series' existing style, Ultima VIII would move from the trademark oblique projection viewpoint to an isometric one. This perspective wasn't new in video game graphics. Many games, especially those made for the ZX Spectrum, had used the style for years. It was often seen in tactical combat maps for strategy games or other CRPGs, but it was still relatively novel, especially in a freely explorable open environment. It's critical to understand that this freedom is what separated Ultima from its contemporaries. This is what excited players. During development, series fans and journalists were given an early look at the engine, and it was rave reviews all around. It was a sensible evolution from the existing viewpoint, which was admittedly somewhat awkward. It was the age of finding one's footing, and it seemed that Ultima had arrived at its logical conclusion. With positive feedback on early glimpses of the game and Garriott enjoying the expanded financial resources of EA, the future of Ultima looked bright, but for one problem. EA wanted the game out for Christmas of '93, just as they'd wanted Serpent Isle out for Christmas of '92, and Origin themselves wanted the Black Gate out for Christmas of '91. The common link between all of these cases is that it never happened because it wasn't possible. Although pre-production on Serpent Isle and Ultima VIII began around the same time, the latter's entirely new engine ate up much of its first year of development. EA made it clear that this time around the holiday deadline was not open to negotiation. This game was coming out by Christmas, by hook or by crook. While Origin was known for its harsh periods of crunch, Ultima VIII's development plumbed dismal new depths. Employees were subject to mandatory 84-hour work weeks for 10 months straight. Origin's wages weren't exactly competitive at the best of times. In fact, they were rather notoriously low compared to other studios. Between this and the slow dismantling of Origin's tight-knit environment, it was no wonder that employees came and went. In retrospect, Garriott admitted that overhiring and renting an entirely new building around this time amounted to, quote, a strategic failure, which is about the most Garriott way of putting it. In the final month of development, upper management relented, giving Origin workers every second Sunday off. As Garriott put it in his memoir, this was so they could see their family and do laundry. He goes on to lament this period of time surrounding Ultima VIII's development.
The creative joy we'd once shared in developing a game had been replaced by the prosaic demands of running a business. It was hard to believe how much had changed. Only a few years earlier, our people would happily work all night and love every minute of it. And now, we had become a sweatshop.
Directorial duties on Ultima VIII would fall on Mike McShaffrey. Mike's time at Origin had begun with programming work on Martian Dreams, followed by the Black Gate. At this time, programmers were the stars of development teams, so there was often a clear pipeline from programming to directing. It wasn't unusual, yet Mike had no experience leading a team, much less one the size of Ultima VIII's. But, as in previous Ultimas, Garriott was acting as producer, keeping the project on track and providing creative direction, so there was always somebody watching over Mike and the team. It was decided early on that Ultima VIII wouldn't take place in Britannia at all, but the mysterious land of Pagan, a world victimized by the Guardian. The game would feature a dark, sinister tone and themes which were intended to have the player grappling with moral questions the series hadn't yet tackled, specifically questions of moral relativism, how one reconciles with their own deeply held beliefs in a world that doesn't share them. Since Garriott wasn't a part of Serpent Isle's development, he, like Spectre, insisted he get his own non-Britannian Ultima. For a number of reasons, this complicated the team's already massive workload. To begin with, the mechanics. Richard's direction for Ultima VIII was inspired by two of his favorite games at the time, Monkey Island 2 and Prince of Persia. Indeed, either for lack of time or lack of interest, Garriott rarely touched contemporary RPGs. The evidence was in Ultima's shift away from genre conventions like tactical combat and character building. Garriott's interests lay elsewhere. Ultima VII, for example, was built as a sandbox, full of simulated physics, interactivity, and plenty of realistically written and scheduled characters. What the game lacked was physicality, a true sense of being there in the world. So-called cinematic platformers like Prince of Persia were built on physicality, realistic animations, and movement controls which required deliberate timing and input on the part of the player. In Ultima VII, if you want to pick up an item, you click on it and drag it into the on-screen inventory. As a character in-world, the avatar's involvement in moving the object is only implied. You essentially pretend that he's going around picking things up. It was simple and it worked well enough, but as Garriott thought, it wasn't very realistic. How can someone open a door so far away from them? How can you have a conversation with someone who isn't even in the same room as you? To Garriott, these minor disconnections from the game world piled up and prevented Ultima from achieving its storytelling potential. He wanted less theater of the mind, looking to the rotoscoped movements of games like Out of This World for inspiration. Games like these were often compared to interactive movies. For Garriott, to whom many of Ultima's ideas came while watching sci-fi and fantasy flicks, making Ultima feel like a movie seemed like the next logical step. The Black Gate had also introduced verticality into the game world. This allowed objects to exist on separate elevations, like mountain peaks, flying carpets, and forest canopies. Garriott wanted both verticality and physicality to play a greater role in Ultima VIII's world design. He wanted to give players the ability to climb stepped cliffs, or leap from second-story balconies, John Woo style. These were simple features in theory, but implementing them proved difficult. The rudimentary physics system from previous games would basically have to be scrapped in favor of something far more sophisticated. Thanks to the new graphical style, Ultima VIII's artists also couldn't reuse old assets, or even really use them as references. Rather than hand-drawing all new graphics, artists were tasked with using state-of-the-art software called 3D Studio to model characters and objects in 3D. Frames of these objects in motion would then be pre-rendered from several different viewpoints, creating snapshots of animated characters. According to McShaffrey, the avatar's sprites amounted to 5 megabytes, an unprecedented amount of graphics data for a single character. It was a significant change to the art team's usual methods. Thankfully, Denis Loubet had always been eager to take on new technological challenges, from painting the traditional fantasy box art of the early Ultimas to creating 16 by 16 tiles used for in-game graphics. He was now ready and willing to learn all about 3D rendering. Colleagues would see Loubet moving back and forth from his computer to the hallway, mimicking the avatar's movements and then applying his own observations to his work. It was outside of his existing skill set, but he threw himself into it. Undoubtedly, the Ultima team was lucky to have Loubet. But even with seasoned team members around, not being able to repurpose ideas from old Ultima games made for a big challenge. Not only graphically, but in terms of world design. Over the years, the teams who'd worked on Ultima got Britannia's design down to a mirror sheen. By Ultima VII, there was a near-perfect density of towns, dungeons, secrets, and all sorts of details. The design team had to start from scratch with Pagan, and they struggled to build momentum. How are they going to make this new map fun and interesting while still maintaining a grim, apocalyptic tone? It didn't help matters that they were trying to design an entirely new world before the game mechanics had even been finalized. It's hard to decide where rivers or lakes should be if you don't know if the avatar can swim, or how big a city should be when you don't know how many NPCs might be in the game. There had never been this level of disconnect between departments in any prior Ultima project. Long hours are one thing, but feeling as though you're never making any progress is salt in the wound. Feedback from the QA department reflected these development problems. Testers were quick to point out that early iterations of Ultima VIII didn't have any kind of hook. Garriott, who was directly involved in the project's early days, was now rarely seen by McShaffrey and his team. He was producing 2 additional games at the time, and probably took for granted that everything was going smoothly. McShaffrey would later claim that Garriott's absence affected the project in negative ways. Despite EA's insistence on the matter, Ultima VIII literally could not be finished in time for Christmas of 1993. The employees would have died trying, and they still would have failed. The game now had to be on store shelves prior to EA's fiscal year end of March 25th. Employees sacrificed their well-being to get the game done. Regarding this, Garriott has said,
"We would bring dinner in for the employees because we were afraid if they left, they might not come back."
The fears were not unfounded. EA's upper management told Garriott that it was do or die. In this case, that meant cutting content yet again, and cut they did. They carved Ultima VIII down, making sure the game was functional, but not much else. Somehow, thanks to the collective ambition that had made Origin what it was, Ultima VIII Pagan shipped on March 23rd of 1994, beating its deadline by just 2 days. Wow, okay, if Ultima 3's art was controversial, there's no doubt Origin knew they might be stepping in something here. But this was the 90s. This was the decade of Doom, 9 Inch Nails, defacing public property, then busting out a sick indie nosebone over it. If you were plugged into pop culture at the time, you knew the Nancy Reagans of the world had lost, and controversy was now a commodity. Luckily for Origin, Pagan was also released mere months before game publishers implemented the ESRB age rating system. This meant Pagan was the last of the unrated Ultimas, and as such, there may have been just a few parents who let this one squeak by. It's hard to imagine that Origin wasn't leapfrogging on the demonic aesthetic of Doom. Further comparisons can be made on the back of the box. A fast-paced, thrilling adventure, intense magic and fantasy, real-world physics, real-time combat, leaping, climbing, running, throwing. You'd be forgiven for assuming that this wasn't a CRPG at all. It's clear that Origin and EA were trying to appeal to those outside of Ultima's usual install base, shirking the series' identity as a slow-paced morality simulator. Don't worry, you don't have to be nice to bees anymore. Ultima is badass now. As usual, the adventure begins as soon as you open the box. The first notable inclusion is a cloth map of Pagan itself. The game world is surrounded by vast oceans, dotted with shipwrecks and deadly crags reaching from the depths. At the center of the world is a volcano whose ridges segment Pagan into distinct zones, a little foreshadowing for the game's world design. The box also comes with a metal coin engraved with Pagan's signature pentagram, although the included reference guide is quick to point out that, quote, the terms pentagram and pagan were selected for their relevance to the storytelling and setting. Origin wishes to imply no additional connotations for the words and concepts defined above. Of course, there's the usual Origin paperwork, mail-in guides, and product catalogs. I tell you, I think I have enough product catalogs to buy Origin's entire product catalog. The box also includes a pamphlet advertising both the clue book and something called the Ultima VIII Speech Pack. See, Pagan released during that transition from floppy disks to CDs. As a result, the game came on no less than 8 floppies. Even with that many discs, almost all of the voice acting recorded for the game had to be cut. In a rather miserly ploy to turn cut content into revenue, Origin released a separate piece of software called the Speech Pack, charging $25 US. That's not even including shipping. Your local game store probably didn't carry this thing. Unsurprisingly, this add-on didn't sell very well. There is a short story about a penguin named Spot the Spoonmaker who lives in Texas hidden in a file on the disc, so I guess that might increase the value proposition. In any case, it didn't matter much, as shortly after the game's launch, Origin released a CD version of the game. It was not only cheaper than the original release, but included both the speech pack as well as a patch, which would have been difficult to access otherwise. You even had the option of mailing in your floppy in exchange for the CD version. Still $10, but a little less dastardly than 25. Included also is a manual, the Chronicle of Pagan. This text, like many before it, is said to be written by an in-universe character, a fellow named Bentic. The book tells of Pagan's history, how the modern-day inhabitants of the world are descendants of an ancient people known as Zealans. These Zealans supposedly worship a trinity of gods seen by pagans as false ones: the goddess of love, Amoris, the god of hate, Odeon, and the god of impartiality, Apathis. Bentic writes of Zealan barbarism, his words dripping with contempt for their backwards views. Then came the Second Age, the time of change. In this epoch, a rebellion was fomented by a religious order in touch with a new, far greater god, the Guardian. The Guardian warned the pagans of a coming age wherein a being would arrive in their world, bringing with him chaos and disorder. Those who believed the Guardian erected a temple in his honor, building a black obelisk to his specifications. At his command, the followers began worshipping spirits of the 4 elements who served as the foundation of the world: Lithos, the titan of earth; Pyros, the titan of fire; Hydros, the titan of water; and Stratos, the titan of air. Over time, the 4 titans became the dominant forces in pagan religion. Then, one day, the Guardian told his worshippers to flee the temple, for an evil being known as the Destroyer was coming. The red-faced Destroyer arrived, annihilating the temple and causing havoc across the land. A fierce battle erupted between the Titans and the Destroyer. Eventually, the Titans claimed victory, but it came at a terrible cost. The once beautiful world of Pagan was flooded. Only one island remained, the volcano Morgalen and the land surrounding it. It became a wasteland of scorched earth and perpetually darkened skies. Yet, the Titans prevailed, ensuring the few survivors would follow the Guardian. The Titans would then set their sights upon one another, vying for supremacy over Pagan. Follower groups splintered, pledging allegiance to one titan or another, but their collective devotion to the Guardian has never waned. The book goes on to explain the history of the Titans and their followers, how some of the Titans made peace while others were subdued. The history of Pagan is pretty intriguing. The fact that it's written by people who consider the Guardian to be a benevolent force also adds an interesting perspective to our villain. On that note, you can't help but wonder what this so-called destroyer is. A red menace? It's either the Guardian or Vladimir Lenin from Martian Dreams, but I don't think that's canon, so it's probably going to be the Guardian. Some of Pagan's inhabitants seem to be aware of Britannia's existence. The manual makes mention of someone named Mordra who insisted on Britannia's history being chronicled alongside Pagan's. Mordra was actually a part of Ultima VII's main story. However she got to Britannia from Pagan, she perished in a fire that consumed Skara Brae and was trapped in limbo as a ghost. Her inexplicable wisdom did seem strange back then, so it's kinda cool to know that she was like a dimensional traveler on top of everything else. There was also a man named Morgrim in Serpent Isle. He was an inhabitant of Pagan who fled the world after its destruction, one of few who was aware of the Guardian's true intentions. If we want to uncover the mysteries of Pagan, there's nothing left to do but jump in. Literally, Serpent Isle ended with the Guardian yoinking the Avatar out of the ethereal void, and now we find ourselves falling into the sea surrounding Morgalen.
I banish you to the world of Pagan. No one here knows of the Avatar.
Like Ultima VII, there's no stat allocation or class selection whatsoever. For the first time in a mainline game, you're not even allowed to play as a female avatar, or choose a portrait. Your avatar is this guy no matter what. Team members did fight for a female avatar. It was a series tradition at this point, but with the complexities of the new sprite making process and little disk space to play with, it just wasn't feasible. The Avatar is rescued from the depths of Pagan's Sea of Rains by a friendly fisherman named Devon. He tells us that we're nearby Pagan's last remaining settlement, Tenebrae, the city of eternal twilight. Devon seems like a pretty straight shooter, and seeing our confusion points us in the direction of his friend, the scholar Bentik. Before you even have a chance to explore, you stumble across a scene that really sets the table for our adventure. At the docks, a man named Torin is found guilty of blaspheming against Tenebrae's ruler, Lady Mordea. With his wife crying nearby and no trial to speak of, he's executed. His head rolls into the sea, now property of the Lurker, the Titan of Water. This, apparently, is a fate far worse than death, though without context we can only speculate what manner of hell Torin finds himself in now. Torin's wife weeps next to his lifeless body. Welcome to Pagan. I can't deny this game makes a pretty strong first impression. Its strange culture and rituals are briefly explained, just enough to pique your curiosity, but the violent nature of this world is best shown rather than told. Ultima VII makes a similar impression with Christopher's murder, but having a front row seat really changes the dynamic. We're not in pursuit of a dastardly killer. We know exactly who the killer is, Lady Mordea, whose rule is widely accepted. There's no authority to report to, no friends to turn to, and no words to console the grieving widow with. There's nothing we can do but watch and go about our business, hoping that we're not next. Feelings of helplessness and hopelessness are delivered here very efficiently. Based on first impressions, the game seems to have a lot of promise, but sooner or later, you actually have to play it. The changes made to the core of Ultima are immediately noticeable, and they're pretty radical. First of all, there's no party system at all. It's the Avatar wandering around Pagan by his lonesome until the bitter end. Second of all, the movement is very different. Rather than instantly moving in the direction with the mouse or arrow keys, the Avatar is fully animated. You have to move your cursor to the direction that you want to move in, then right-click. The further your cursor is from the Avatar, the faster he'll run, and vice versa. The key difference is that the Avatar is fully animated. No more two-frame animations. Now you actually have to wait for the Avatar to build and lose momentum, to swing his body around and physically face a different direction before you can start moving again. In an effort to make a more realistic movement system, they've created a huge sense of disconnect between the player and the Avatar. It's like you're making suggestions for him rather than controlling him directly. This lack of immediacy is a constant source of frustration when you're trying to make sudden movements or small adjustments. Walking around a tree or finding a path through a simple doorway can take time, especially if your character is being obscured by a wall. So you'll be rocking the avatar back and forth, and sometimes your input just isn't read properly. We haven't even had a chance to do anything yet, and the simple act of moving through empty space is suboptimal, to put it nicely. You'll also notice that there are no longer character portraits during conversations. There's no level ups, no need to eat food, no lock picking, no alternative transportation methods. In exchange, you're given jumping and climbing, and the avatar looks like a forgotten McDonald's mascot called Big Deus McVolt or something. It neither looks nor feels like Ultima. But in fairness, this could very well be the point, so let's see what Pagan does with this break from its source material. Your first stop is the city of Tenebrae. It's broken up into 3 distinct regions, separated by loading screens. In fact, Pagan is the first Ultima game in quite some time to break up the world in this way. Even Serpent Isle, whose dungeons weren't congruous with the environment, used clever tricks to maintain the open world. Pagan is made up of many smaller maps, separated by brief loading screens and connected via doorways or other choke points. With Tenebrae, you've got the central area where Lady Mordea's palace is located. There's also West Tenebrae, where you'll find businesses like the blacksmith, the pub, and the ghost house. Finally, East Tenebrae is a residential district. There are faint essences of Ultima to be found here. Objects can still be picked up and moved, and there's even a little throwing animation this time around, which I like. Drawers can be rifled through, filled with mostly useless but authenticity-enhancing goods. The way that Pagan's engine handles verticality is also pretty impressive. Moving up and down stairways is smooth now, as much as the controls will allow it to be anyway. The way that the game's internal grid-based system works means that climbing is now possible depending on how high the surface is. You can jump down too. It's pretty janky, but I can't imagine you'll have to be doing much jumping here, so it is forgivable. For the first time, you can run around rooftops or break into guard towers by vaulting up to a higher ledge. There are lots of optional buildings with nooks and crannies to explore in Tenebrae. In typical Ultima fashion, doing this is totally optional, just there for the curious player. It's always a nice feeling to lift up a book and find an unexpected key to something underneath. Unfortunately, this is also where Ultima VIII falters. The rewards for exploration, and everything really, are severely diminished due to changes made to Ultima's formula. As I mentioned, your character doesn't level up, at least not in a traditional sense. You have 3 stats: strength, dexterity, and intelligence. Instead of gaining experience points and seeking a trainer as you would in previous games, stat improvements are made through repeatedly taking relevant actions. The RPG elements in Black Gate and Serpent Isle were already quite shallow, and with Pagan, this trajectory continues. Like many of the game's issues, the changes to leveling can be chalked up to the pursuit of realism. And yeah, on paper it doesn't sound bad. You swing your weapon at enemies to become stronger. You cast spells or read books to become more intelligent. It makes sense. But in practice, it's all kinds of bad. Your skills begin at 15 and cap at 25. Reaching that cap is way too easy. If you want to level up your strength, stand in place and swing your weapon for a while. Better yet, find an NPC who doesn't react to your hits and swing on them. Your gains will be quicker. If you want to level your intelligence, the best way to do so is to cast spells until your mana bar is empty, then use your sleeping bag for an hour and do it all over again. It's not as though these are hidden exploits, this is just the most sensible and intuitive way of gaining stats. The difference between high and low stats is pretty negligible anyway, so for the most part, you'll just want to level up to get it out of the way. It's one less thing to think about. It defeats the purpose of an RPG, the feeling of building a character and overcoming challenges. Because Pagan features far more linear world design, you're rarely, if ever, in a situation where you can't handle what the game is throwing at you. For all of the Black Gate's problems, the fact that you could run into enemies that just wreck your shit shortly after leaving Trinsic is a microcosm of what makes the game so good. You're allowed to pick fights that you probably can't win, though perhaps you can through clever means. You can engage with puzzles that you might not have the context to solve. The game lets you scrape your knees, get into trouble, learn. Pagan is more of a helicopter parent. It doesn't want you going outside because you might catch cold. so enemies don't often pose a challenge, and if they do, you are seldom punished for just walking right past them. Still, stats are needed for other things: hit accuracy, being able to cast more magic without resting, and carry weight. That last one is important because no Ultima game makes you schlep around more shit than Pagan does. If you know what previous Ultima inventories look like, then the concept of having even more stuff should strike fear into your heart. So the need for level ups is almost purely tied to avoiding inconvenience, rather than to engage with the role-playing aspects of the game. That's mainly a result of how combat works here, or how it doesn't. If you've been following the Ultima Retrospective, you already know how I feel about combat in Ultima VII's engine. In case you forgot, it's bad. It's real bad. You press the C key and you hope for the best. Your characters are almost entirely autonomous, throwing explosives into the center of the battlefield, going out of their way to get poisoned, and tripping every trap in a 35-mile radius. So yeah, it was bad. Rather than looking to this or any previous Ultima system to see where improvements might be made, Pagan throws the baby out with the bathwater.
Oh, baby!
Yes, I know I've already used this clip, but I'm probably going to use it again. Combat in Pagan is action-based. You ready your weapon and it becomes a free-for-all. You just click as fast as you can. If the combat gods are generous, your opponent will be stun-locked. If the stars align against you, the avatar will be stun-locked. Just keep clicking. Click in the vague direction of the enemy. You'll eventually prevail. Magic does become a factor later in the game, but it's rarely a practical option. This is due not only to its complexity, but the fact that the game doesn't pause as you go through your inventory or arrange your spells. This is a critical design flaw because every second you aren't clicking like an idiot is a second wasted. It completely discourages you from using magic or any item really. And why bother? With the exception of the Grant Peace spell, there's almost no problem in Pagan that can't be solved with a good walloping. To make matters worse, the selection of armor and weapons you can use is leaner than ever. In a recent game, say Underworld 2, there were 33 different weapons you could equip. In Ultima VII, there was 45, along with 9 different ammo types. In Ultima VIII, there's a total of just 15 weapons across the entire game. That includes the 8 unique variants of existing ones. In fact, several of the best weapons in the game can be acquired easily within the first hour or so. No joke, I had like 3 magical weapons before I even found a pair of pants. Look, I understand, weapons like the rake, the meat cleaver, the wool shears, they're not very useful. You probably wouldn't take them into combat. But if you ask me, focusing on practicality misses the point. If Pagan is willing to sacrifice playability for the sake of realism, then it's safe to say that verisimilitude is the goal. Sure, your starting sword in Ultima VII is better than the rake, so why even include it, right? Well, because it's the principle of the matter. It's having the ability to pick up a rake and swing it at an ogre that makes Ultima VII's fantasy so appealing. And not only that, but convincing. Why pick wool shears over a morning star? Because you can. And you might accidentally figure out that by using wool shears on cloth, you can create usable bandages for your party. You'd only have a hunch to try such a thing if you believed that the game would allow it. If you want your player to believe that your world is rife with possibilities, let them pick up a rake and swing it at Lord British's tender head. But Ultima VIII doesn't let you do that. It doesn't want you to believe in endless possibilities, because it doesn't have them. The Ultima simulation has been completely gutted here. You'd be forgiven for thinking otherwise off the hop. Devon gives you some food and lets you rest by his campfire. Maybe hunger and cold are still factors. You can see your reflection when you stand in front of a mirror. Sort of. That's like old Ultima. Slightly less convincing, mind you. Pagan has its own calendar with cool month names like Dark Flame and Stone Mark, and days like Water Day and Air Day. NPCs must still have schedules. In fact, with months in the mix, maybe schedules are more detailed than ever. Maybe certain holidays or interesting occasions can occur on particular months and days, like the eclipses you'd sometimes see in old Ultima games. Roll all of your hopes into a ball and send them straight to hell, because no. Temperature and hunger are gone. Look, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that stuffing YOLO's leathery face full of pork pies was engaging, or that Serpent Isle's frequent Ushanka shuffling made the game better. But the removal of these things betrays a design philosophy that echoes throughout Pagan. It doesn't seek to improve things, or add things, or expand on them. It gets rid of things, pares them down, simplifies them. Here you are, a literal castaway in an unfamiliar land. You have no party to babysit, no knowledge of the strange flora and fauna in this untamed wasteland. If there were ever a perfect time to dig into the survival elements that previous games have flirted with, it would be this right here. But Pagan passes the opportunity up. Barring a few exceptions, almost none of the odds and ends in people's houses can be interacted with in a meaningful way either. In Ultima VII, you could build your own house with scrap 2x4s, you could play the harp, make a loaf of bread, change a diaper, throw the dirty one at your friends. Now what clutter we do have is purely decorative. It doesn't interface with the world at all beyond looking pretty. You can't use a cannon to blow a door open, or find a canvas and paint a picture, or use your precious glass swords to kill a quest-necessary NPC. The game doesn't give you the tools to do anything beyond that which is necessary to reach the credits. In the Black Gate, you're funneled towards Britain, but you don't have to go there. You can head in the complete opposite direction, finding caverns, a harpy's nest, treasure cleverly hidden under a tree. That sort of curiosity and wanderlust is discouraged now. If you head in the opposite direction of your goals in Pagan, you'll typically find water, which kills you instantly. Sometimes there's a treasure chest, which explodes for some reason. But they're full of equipment and money. It's not usually useful in the least. The blacksmith only makes low-level gear, there aren't any spells to buy, and food is just a worse version of a health potion, which there's plenty of. There are still NPC schedules to a degree, but the implementation here is clumsy, worse than Ultima VII in every way. In previous Ultimas, you would see characters waking up, sitting down for breakfast, heading to work, doing that work, producing goods, or performing labor. They would go to the tavern, employees would fetch them food or beer and clean up their dishes afterwards. Much of this was accomplished through smoke and mirrors, but that hardly matters. It was convincing, an effective way of making the world feel like more than just you. Britannia had a pulse, it lived. Pagan feels dead in comparison. Thematically appropriate, maybe, but it just feels like a pale imitation of Black Gate. Because the areas are segmented with loading screens, you can't follow people as they go about their business. In fact, they don't really go about their business. They just sort of suddenly appear where they're supposed to be, as long as you're not looking. Even this rudimentary system is finicky, forcing you to leave and come back several times before the game registers a location change. At the very least, there aren't that many NPCs to have trouble with. Pagan reduces the number of characters from the literal hundreds in Ultima VII to about 36, less depending on your definition of a character. The vast majority of this small cast exists almost solely to move the main quest forward, making them feel even less alive. Tenebrae, as mentioned, is the only real settlement in Ultima VIII. There are small camps dotting the landscape, but as far as traditional explorable cities, places like Monitor, Trinsic, Moonshade, or Fawn, all we have is Tenebrae. Without character portraits, much of the personality and dialogue is missing. Having a charming little face to give you an idea of an NPC's disposition or even their past was a key component of the series' identity, starting with False Prophet. Now your only visual reference is a little character sprite which occasionally gesticulates with its weirdly long arms. In fairness, not all presentational changes are bad. The graphics, for instance, are quite nice. The isometric perspective gives you a broader view of the world and makes larger enemies look much more intimidating. As much as they drag the movement down, the animations look pretty great for their time and give the visual storytelling a chance to shine too. The pausing of gameplay for the sake of story cutscenes had been used sparingly throughout the Ultima games, such as the player's imprisonment by Lord Blackthorn in Ultima V, or through the use of still frames in other games. Scenes that pause the gameplay but continue to play out from the same perspective were used much more heavily in Serpent Isle. With Pagan, Origin doubled down on this. The cutscenes do benefit from improvements to the engine. Micro-movements from pre-rendered sprites add articulation that previous games could never achieve. The use of camera movement to draw your attention to different parts of a scene also gives the game a much more cinematic visual language. Dramatic pauses and unique animations play out in particular moments, letting you see what your character sees instead of having it awkwardly explained in a text box. In terms of its animations and how they're used in storytelling, it's as objective an improvement over its predecessor as you're likely to find in Pagan. If Garriot's goal was to reduce the need for theater of the mind, then he definitely succeeded in this aspect. That said, visual changes here aren't universally good. There's a high level of detail in the game's sprite work, but it suffers from a really drab color palette that hardly changes throughout the whole game. So many hours upon hours are spent in dusty gray tombs and caves with brown dirt floors. It's absolutely fatiguing coming off of the gorgeous Ultima VII engine games. Those games manage to portray grim scenes and even apocalyptic hellscapes while retaining their imagination and vibrance. When Ultima VIII is on, it can look excellent, but sadly that's a small fraction of the game's runtime. Graphical features like the proto-dynamic lighting system in previous Ultimas are also lacking. There are no torches or light spells at all anymore, and you can't tell what time it is at a glance. I know Pagan is another dimension, who knows what their sun situation is, but I have to say having the world perpetually look and feel the same makes the supposedly crazy new world of Pagan feel way less mysterious than even Britannia. Unique weather occurrences like magic rain, teleportation storms, and even just fog made the act of walking around memorable in previous games. In its place, there's really nothing. Certain weather effects will theoretically play out at key moments throughout the story, but it's usually nothing more than a temporary screen recolor. You'd think the sky would be the limit as far as mythical phenomena go. We're in a strange world dominated by elemental titans, but it just doesn't go in any interesting directions. On that note, and with my less than favorable impression of Pagan out of the way, what exactly is the Avatar's quest here? It all starts in the city of Tenebrae. As mentioned, the city is under the tyrannical control of Lady Mordea. She's what's known as a Tempest, that is, a person who, through the power of their bloodline, is able to wield some of the water titan Hydros' magic. Because of Tempestry's destructive ability and its hereditary nature, Tempests are seen as royalty, the rightful rulers of Tenebrae. A Tempest is capable of feats like creating storms and walking on water, making them both feared and respected. Mordea's tyranny is plain to see. Guards shake down the homeless, movement in and out of the city is restricted, and citizens are executed over unproven accusations. Fear and paranoia dominate the city, so it's not a great time to be asking a lot of questions. It's an even worse time to be announcing that you're some guy called the Avatar, and it is most certainly not a good time to be talking shit about the Guardian. They like the Guardian here, and the criminal justice system of Pagan is swift. Thankfully, Bentik, the scholar who wrote the game manual, is a more open-minded sort. Well confused about you wanting to leave Pagan, whatever that means, he tells you that your best bet is an old man named Mithrin, who lives on a plateau north of Tenebrae. Mithrin, a powerful thaumaturgist, is fascinated by the Avatar's plight and agrees to help us leave the realm of Pagan. This is easier said than done. In order to tear through the veil, one must master the 4 elements, which means mastering the power of the 4 titans. He recommends the Avatar first travel east of Tenebrae, where the necromancers practice the magic of Lithos, the Earth Titan. We're given a magical gem of recall. If you find a recall pad, it activates and gives you a fast travel point. It's a very helpful and frankly necessary item to get through the game. This is a result of Pagan's world design, which is very different than any world we've seen in Ultima. At the perennial risk of repeating myself, the beauty of Britannia is its openness. Not only Britannia, but even Sosaria, the first incarnation of Ultima's open world. Unless you count this, which I'm not gonna. Anyway, even in Sosaria, you were free to go where you pleased as long as you had the means. If you have the dosh for a land speeder, the world is your oyster. If you saved up and bought a space shuttle, then everything other than the world is also your oyster. In Ultima 2, you could steal a shuttle from the Russians and go to Uranus. It was hilarious and traumatizing and pointless, but hilarious. I don't even know if it was pointless. I'm still talking about it over 40 years later, so it's hard to argue there's no value whatsoever in having the freedom to explore where you aren't meant to, right? In Ultima's case, I'd go so far as to say there's obvious value in it. Its nonlinear structure encourages you to develop first-hand experience with Britannia and the people in it, making those necessary segments more relevant to your interests as a person. Serpent Isle was a decisive step away from this open world design. It was the first game that hard-gated your progress based on quest triggers, and it did so frequently. Do not pass go. Do not enter the gargoyle caverns until the avatar watches a naked woman spin while funny music plays. Yet the environments, while self-contained and not always accessible, had an openness in their design that still encouraged exploration. You can go off the beaten path and talk to whoever you want to, except for the ghost that secretly softlocks you 50 hours after you speak to him. Woe be to thee, who speaks to the softlocking ghost. Ultima VIII's world design is very constraining in comparison. Your central hub of Tenebrae leads you to a few possible pathways, which lead to further pathways. Once you've completed an objective, you don't walk home or sail home or take a magic carpet home, nothing like that. You use the recall gem to go back to Tenebrae, and more often than not, you never return. When you pair these big hallway-style levels with Pagan's tendency to block progress via quest triggers through dialogue, what you've got is the most linear Ultima ever made. Of course, linearity isn't inherently bad, but non-linearity is a core tenet of Ultima. Mechanically, it may be the single biggest piece of the series' identity. Its absence is a massive change to the formula, and what we receive in its stead is not worth the sacrifice. In prior Ultimas, each location seemed to have a purpose that justified its existence beyond being a game level. Dungeons weren't just dungeons, they were abandoned prisons with still working torture devices and remains of victims found around every corner. They were catacombs lined with skulls and worldly possessions of the departed. They were facilities used to supply power to ancient Martian technology. They were lived-in spaces with purpose and practicality, like weird sex guy type stuff. Ultima would commit to naturalistic design, sometimes to its own detriment, making areas feel like they could exist even when that didn't make for the best video game level. A sawmill would have machinery attached to a water wheel. Far downstream the river, you'd see flotsam and waste product from the mill washed up on shore. The player was given the freedom to explore and uncover the inner workings of the world. Pagan, on the other hand, exists mostly for your viewing pleasure, if you want to call it that. On top of constraining where you're allowed to go and when you can go there, there's very little indication of how this world works or why things work or what its people even do. Why is there an exploding treasure chest just outside of the town gates? Why is there a haunted house in the middle of Tenebrae's business district? It seems like some things were just plopped down haphazardly to make the environments slightly more interesting. I mean, who builds all of these recall pads? I know they're an in-game mechanic, but why do they exist? Moon gates are functionally the same thing, just fast travel points, but there's a lore attached to them. They're supernatural phenomena relating to phases of the moon. People see them, they understand roughly what they do, but they remain largely unexplained. They could have been teleporters that just take you from point A to point B, but no. The lore and the mechanics need to smooch in ways that enhances believability, so the moon gates actually respond to the in-game phases of the moon, which you're allowed to keep track of. They're bound to rules which exist with or without the avatar. Recall pads, they're just there. Ancient technology, I don't know, maybe. Why the hell does Mithrin have one in his foyer? Did he build the house around it, or did he just drag it up here? You never even explained what the recall gem is. I don't even know if it is a gem, it's just called the recall item. Am I the only one who has one? Isn't Lady Mordea the least bit curious why I keep showing up on her roof? I'm being a bit of an ass here, as I am wont to do. But that's the thing, Ultima is a pretty ass-proof series. If you have a nitpicky question, Ultima typically has an answer for you. I can understand the smaller world size, the game being made on a new engine and all, but losing both Ultima's incredible sense of place as well as its boundless freedom makes for a world that's hard to become invested in. This apathy reaches outside of the game and into the real world. The pentagram coin included with the game, what is this supposed to be? I mean, I know that the pentagram is used as a symbol on the box and stuff, but what is this coin? It's not in the game at all. Ultima 4's Ankh, Ultima 5's Codex coin, 6's Orb of the Moons, 7's Fellowship Medallion, and Underworld's runes all exist in their worlds. They draw a connection between our world and the world of Ultima, making it clear that you are acting through the avatar, that he's your agent. The pentagram coin, I don't know, I guess it kinda looks cool, but that's about it. It's not a portal to another world or a piece of Britannia that reflects your avatarhood. It's a crackerjack prize, a piece of physical evidence that we've lost touch with what made this series brilliant. Ultima was remarkable, but Origin, it seems, didn't remember why. Pagan's backstory, insofar as it's told through in-game texts and optional conversations, is actually quite fascinating at points. There's a lot of info to chew on regarding the followers of the Titans, the ancient Zealans, and the war with the so-called Destroyer. I really like how the Guardian's inclusion is handled. From dialogue with locals in the included manual, the Guardian is seen as a savior whose actions overcame the Destroyer. It's only through your own experiences with the Guardian in previous games that you'd pick up on the reality of the situation. The Guardian is the Destroyer. The people of Pagan never described the Guardian's features because they never saw him, they only heard his voice. We know from the Black Gate that the Guardian is capable of manipulating groups of people through his voice alone. Now we have evidence that the Fellowship isn't the first religion he started. Just like Ultima VII, he has his followers build an obelisk, only in this case, he succeeded in coming through, disguised as the Destroyer. It becomes clear that the Zealans, those people who rejected the Guardian's new orthodoxy, did so because they saw through his lies, knowing that the Guardian and the Destroyer were one and the same. The Guardian, in league with the Titans, encouraged his followers to slaughter the unbelieving Zealans, just as he told his Fellowship followers to kill anyone wise to his schemes. Connecting the dots and realizing that the Guardian is actually adhering to a playbook he's had for God knows how long is a pretty cool moment. But it doesn't happen in-game. It happens while you're reading the manual, so even here it's hard to give credit to Ultima VIII itself. Nonetheless, it's a believable tale in the bounds of the Ultima canon, and a well-constructed one. Rather than twirling his giant purple mustache and coming through the gate, that's the color I think it'd be if he had one, the Guardian uses his talent for deception to have others do his dirty work. The Titans aren't really gods at all, powerful beings, no doubt, since the balance of Pagan depends on their magic. But the Titans are little more than Guardian lackeys, even if they themselves were fooled by his honeyed words and million-dollar smile. It's a solid backstory, and one that doesn't rely on the series' existing and increasingly confusing canon as its foundation, unlike a certain aisle I know. And I ain't talking frozen foods here. Our first real experience with the Titans' followers come from our involvement with the Necromancers. Now, the concept of having different schools of magic based on the four elements was nothing new, but Pagan often takes a pretty unique approach within that. Practitioners of earth magic being necromancers is pretty weird. In Pagan's lore, earth is strongly associated with life and death. This association began long ago when the first necromancer, a man named Moriens, made contact with Lithos. At this time, earthquakes ravaged the land, and the undead rose from their graves to lay siege on Tenebrae. Moriens traveled beneath the earth to make an agreement with Lithos. He would put an end to the earthquakes and stop the undead from attacking Tenebrae. In exchange, Lithos would be given the dead bodies of the pagans, on whose flesh he could feast. Thus, the Order of the Necromancers was established. This group, operating from the graveyard east of Tenebrae, are in charge of preparing bodies for Lithos consumption, purifying them with a ceremonial dagger. They're also able to wield earth magic, much of which is unsavory to the people of Pagan. Abilities like speaking with the souls of the deceased or raising the dead to work for them. Understandably, this has led to many rumors surrounding the necromancers, like they eat the bodies and, other gnarly stuff probably. None of it is true, at least as far as we know, but with the distasteful work and pariah status, it takes a certain special kind of idiot to devote their life to necromancy. Where do I sign up? In a wholly unavatarly act of selfishness and indifference toward the dead, our valiant hero decides he must become a necromancer in order to master earth magic and escape from Pagan, because Mithrin said something vaguely to this effect. So what do? We lie to the current necromancer apprentice, Vividos, saying we wish to join the order because we just love the work so damn much. Once the elder necromancer Lothian dies, and she's gonna real soon, Vividos will take over and we would become his apprentice. Because he's a terrible judge of character, Vividos agrees, but there's a catch. The Titans Lithos and Hydros despise each other since they're both fans of using dead bodies for their nefarious purposes. With almost the entire world destroyed and most people living in abject poverty, there aren't a lot of children being reared in Pagan these days, making fresh bodies more of a delicacy. So Hydros had Lady Mordea steal the necromancer's ceremonial dagger, which enchants the bodies somehow for Lithos' consumption. I don't really know how that works. So before we can become the new apprentice, we must first retrieve the dagger for the necromancers. It's locked in Mordea's personal chest. Her chambermaid tells us to meet her at her house, which she describes only as my house. So after checking every house in the world, you'll eventually find her, but only during a particular time of day, and sometimes only after leaving and reloading the area a few times. She gives you a key to the chest containing the dagger and tells you to keep it a secret. I'm great at keeping secrets. Uh-oh. Hello? I don't suppose we could parlay this into awkward sex like in Serpent Isle. Be careful what you wish for. Okay, so tiptoeing over to the chest. I'll just go ahead and unlock this, and it doesn't work. I looked through my entire inventory. There is definitely no key in here. What happened in the 15 seconds between the chambermaid saying, "Here's the key, go nuts," and my being here? So I go back and ask for the key again. Thankfully, because the game just infinitely repeats dialogue, we do get the key, and here it is now. I tell you all of this in excruciating detail to let you know that these sorts of shenanigans are so common in Ultima 8. The game sometimes just doesn't do what it says it's going to. Items will either disappear or never make it into your inventory in the first place. Of course, it's good Ultima practice to check your inventory anyway, but here you absolutely have to. It's cruelty in game design. It's all made a little bit worse by the fact that Ultima 8's inventory management is just as awful as previous games, and in fact, maybe a little bit worse. I mean, for crying out loud, you're given so many key items throughout this story. If you really trust this game engine, you could go put them down somewhere and hope that they persist, but even that comes with its own problems, since you never really know what you're gonna need unless you've already beaten the game. As usual, you can add sacks and chests to your backpack for sub-containers, but the number of unique items that can be in any one container is pretty low, so you'll need a lot of them. You need bags and bags and bags within bags just to hold the items necessary to cast magic spells. When new items are added to your inventory, they're buried under items at random. Why not just add them to the top left of the bag, like in previous games? Why is it all the way down here? That is just evil. They did this on purpose. You can't convince me otherwise. It doesn't help that the inventory will sometimes randomly do this. Am I meant to believe that every time I open my backpack, a giant actual inventory really diegetically appears in the avatar's world? That's absolutely terrifying. With the dagger returned, Vividos is able to complete the ritual, cleansing Lothian's body and putting her out of her misery. I know I've said it already, but there's just something unavatarly about this whole rigmarole. We've already lied to become a necromancer, now we have to kneel and participate in a ritual sacrifice before a blood-spattered altar surrounded by zombies? I know that the dagger wasn't Mordea's to begin with, but, compulsory breaking and entering and killing seemed to grate against the Ultima ethos. Oh well, I'm sure this will be the last time we have to do anything shady. From here on out, it's Virtue City, baby. Anyway, after lying to Vividos' face, we have to rip open a mass grave to disturb the dead and find Lithos for wholesome reasons. We're told that to complete our training, we must descend into the catacombs, speaking with the spirits of the necromancers who came before. This endless maze of intersections speaks to a proverbial one, a place where most of Pagan's radical changes to the formula convene. It's dungeon crawling. Ultima's relationship to the dungeon is complicated. Akalabeth and Ultima 1 could be described as dungeon crawlers. The latter does have an overworld, but the majority of its essential tasks take the form of semi-randomized quests that send you into dungeons. It was straightforward, it was functional, and it was just a seedling of what would make Ultima such a unique series among other CRPGs. Specifically, it was the fact that Ultima had more than one mode of play. Walking around the overworld and walking in a dungeon look completely different, but they're bound by common play principles. You can get into simple turn-based fights, you can cast any of your spells at any time, you can find and open treasure chests, pick locks, or heal yourself. You've got food that'll deplete as you move around, At a time when you typically get one or the other, Ultima threaded the needle between two very different gameplay styles, becoming a template for generations. Ultima 2 was a sophomore game, a bit of an experiment to see what worked. As a result, it focused less on the dungeons. But Ultimas 3, 4, and 5 doubled back to the first-person dungeon, making it a critical part of each game. Dungeons housed the most interesting combat encounters, the bulk of the game's puzzles, the best loot, and most of the relevant plot beats, if you can call them that. Stuff like the Time Lord and the unearthing of the Codex. Then came Ultima VI with its hard reset to the dungeon formula. The game no longer delineated between gameplay styles. Now your top-down view was unified across the open world. It was impressive, but the byproduct was dungeons feeling less special. Without the perspective, the room-based challenges, that feeling of being 7 levels deep with no end in sight, the uncertainty and immersion were greatly diminished. With this template, the importance of dungeons in the worlds of Ultima games and both parts of Ultima VII were lessened. Of course, the Underworld games brought dungeon crawling back into the limelight in a way that your traditional Ultimas couldn't have done, so it was all well and good. You had your regular Ultimas and your dungeon Ultimas. But before a comfortable rhythm could be found, Pagan showed up, kicking down the door and shotgunning a beer without any pants on. The result is a mainline Ultima in which the vast majority of the game is spent in dungeons once again. Between that, the Avatar journeying without comrades, and combat being a simple slap fight again, one could argue that in some ways, Pagan is a return to the series' roots. However, most Ultima fans would agree that the series' roots, and I mean capital R roots, weren't really worth returning to. I mean, sure, every Ultima has its fans. I'm sure Ultima 2 is someone's favorite, probably for nostalgia reasons, but it's hard to argue in good faith that the dream of Ultima had been realized in those very early games. Still, if executed well, revisiting that sort of simplicity wouldn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. The question is, has it been executed well? The answer is no. No. Fuck no. The dungeons of Ultima 8 are where its influences, Prince of Persia, Monkey Island, are most apparent. The game is chock full of one-off puzzles. Tower of Hanoi, Marble Madness, pull the lever until the thing happens. It's full of item hunting, find the key, find the artifact. And it is full of, oh my yes, platforming. Now, in its original release, the platforming of Ultima 8 was unbearably bad. Anybody telling you that the awfulness of pre-patch Ultima 8's platforming is overstated is either lying or confidently misremembering. The player can't jump with any sort of precision, and the isometric view makes it almost impossible to determine the distance of your jumps, even at the best of times. Clicking both mouse buttons, your character will jump in the direction of your cursor. How far away they'll jump is determined by the distance of your cursor from your character. There's so much ambiguity, not only in the distance of the jump, but what qualifies as solid ground to even jump on. You might be short, you might be long, you might be a perfect distance away but fall anyway because, who knows, you probably deserve it. You vaguely suggest where a jump ought to take you, and that makes platforming very difficult. This being the case, you might think that the designers would have the courtesy of making platforming a very occasional thing. But no! There's a lot of it! Your margin for error is pretty much non-existent. There are times where you have to be extremely accurate several times in a row. Oftentimes, platforms are moving or disappearing, amplifying all of the worst qualities of the controls 100-fold. You will die over and over and over again. I also have to reiterate how bad even the basic movement controls are. Even when you're not forced to make a series of pinpoint accurate jumps, just positioning yourself to make that first jump is frustrating. Every command is delayed thanks to the game's insistence on having detailed, uninterruptible animations. You're essentially queuing up a series of actions to be done one after another. Many games work this way, but when you're in a situation where enemies are closing in or a platform is about to disappear, you need to be confident that the key you press is going to make your character do the thing that it's supposed to do. Not in 3 seconds, not in 1 second, but when the input is made. You have no such confidence playing Ultima VIII. The avatar does what you want him to do maybe 60% of the time. For a platforming game, it's a failing grade. The cinematic platformer works because its rules are clear. Your hazards are constantly evolving, but your toolset doesn't change. It's reliable. Cumbersome by design, but reliably so and in a predictable way. You know how far you'll move with a keystroke or how long it'll take to rotate your character or to jump or crouch. Pagan yanks the rug from under your feet so often that playing the game, not even doing something difficult, but just walking around, is an exercise in perpetual anxiety for what could go wrong next. This is the cause of many problems in Pagan, but one of the most prevalent is the need to save scum. That is, saving every couple of seconds in order to reload when you die. Of course, you can save scum in earlier Ultima games, and most of us have done it, but it shouldn't be constantly necessary as it is in Pagan. In a dungeon, you'd be wise to pause every few seconds and save, wasting time and destroying the game's pacing even further. Your muscle memory will become so advanced that you'll be able to navigate to the save menu with your eyes closed by the end of the game. The other factor in this annoyance is the graphics themselves. A 2D side-scrolling perspective is rock solid for judging distances and heights intuitively. It can become more problematic with other perspectives, and isometric platforming is its own layer of hell, made worse by the game's lack of visuals in regard to height and depth perception. As mentioned, the game allows you to climb to higher points, which is fine when you're just exploring Tenebrae or in another low-stakes situation. But there are times in dungeons where you have to find a pixel-precise spot to climb from. Even then, it'll take several attempts for the game to register a climbing action for no real reason. Sometimes surfaces don't look climbable but are, and vice versa. When you're leaping from a platform to either the north or south, there's no clear indication whether a surface is underneath you, above you, or at your height. You just have to save, jump, and reload when it doesn't pan out. It seems ridiculous, but that's the intended way of playing the game, just saving constantly. It's not like you're given checkpoints or respawn after a jump. You got manual saves or you got nothing. It's all shamefully bad, and I haven't even mentioned traps yet. Some Ultima games implement traps in some pretty despicable ways, but man is it so much worse in 8. You constantly fall through floors with no rhyme or reason. Even when the game doesn't instantly kill you, it's hard to navigate when you fall to lower elevation because the isometric tiles obscure your view. I have no idea where I am or what to do here. Okay, well, whatever, I guess I don't need to worry about it. If an exit is against the southeastern wall, it's hard to tell there's anything there in the first place. You just have to ram your head against obstacles until you hit a loading zone. Often you'll be running around a dungeon when suddenly... Oh, come on. I'm stun locked too, so it's not like I can climb back up. Okay, just gonna tiptoe to the edge of this fireball trap so I can run by. One step at a time. Okay, sometimes fireballs just fall on you. The traps combined with the platforming make for a maddening dungeon experience. And these are long dungeons, and there are a lot of them. The Pagan overworld is actually quite small. Most of your time is spent enthusiastically jumping into bottomless pits in cramped gray and brown caverns, hoping you find the right key. Now for the good news, relatively speaking. Origin provided a post-launch patch for Ultima VIII. This patch included a host of bug fixes, introducing hotkeys, and adds a few small locations to the game. But all that stuff is peanuts compared to the big change: targeted mouse jumping. This patch totally changes the jumping system. Rather than leaping at semi-random depending on the direction you choose, the avatar will attempt to jump directly to the position of your cursor in world. It's still horribly imprecise and usually doesn't work as intended, and when it does, it trivializes the meat of Pagan. But if that's the deal, then I'll take it. The pre-patch jumping controls have become the stuff of Ultima's most diabolical legends. The patch was some small panacea for those lucky enough to have access to it. You'd have to mail in for it or get it via an online bulletin board system, but at least there was an avenue to make Ultima VIII playable. It's hard to imagine all but the most hard-headed, dedicated fans making it to the end of the game using the controls it shipped with. The catacombs here represent the first real dungeon trial, and it's trial by fire. This dungeon is huge. There are multiple levels, lots of maze-like corridors that look the same, branching paths, puzzles with solutions that I still don't entirely understand even after I solve them, chests that explode, enemies to fight, chests that explode. I'd mentioned that most undead foes won't stay down unless you cast a spell called Grant Peace. With your initiation into the Order of the Necromancers, you're given a means to cast earth-based spells, which opens up your options a bit. In order to cast a spell, you first need to create a consumable spell item. For this, you'll need to fill an empty bag with the proper reagents and combine them with an item called the Key of the Caretaker. So on top of needing a bag full of reagents, and the key itself, which is pretty big, you'll also need an empty bag at all times to be used for spell creation. This one thing adds a lot of clutter to your inventory. It may be a minor complaint too, but the reagents look so similar, it's hard to tell them apart at points. Some of them are hard to find as well. One of the first tasks you're given as a necromancer is finding something called a dead man's elbow. You're not really given much of a description. It turns out it's these sticks by this tree, one of many in Tenebrae, I might add. It's a bit unreasonable. You have to reference the manual to know what combination of ingredients will produce a given spell, and I actually don't mind that. Ultima has been using its manuals as spellbooks since as far back as the third game. I think it's a cool way of involving the player in an arcane process. It's one of very few areas in which Pagan reintroduces complexity rather than just simplifying further. In Ultima VII, you'd open your spellbook and click on the spell you wanted to cast. Now, spellcasting is a real commitment, emphasizing magic as a specialized discipline in Pagan's world. I mentioned before that the game doesn't pause when you're going through your inventory, and that undermines the magic system too. Pagan is trying to be an action game. You really need quick access to spells and potions, but now you have to deal with enemies attacking as you fumble through 10 different bags trying to remember where you put one spell, never mind making one in the moment. You're disincentivized from using magic on two fronts. One, because it takes so much time to prepare spells, and two, because it's a pain in the ass to cast them even when you are prepared. Besides, most enemies can be dealt with easily by slapping the shit out of them, so why even bother going through the trouble and cluttering up your inventory with 10 different spells? As an aside, I also feel like some of these spells are a bit antithetical to the Avatar's whole foundational worldview and all. Like, the goal of the catacombs is to find the corpses of necromancers from ages past, then temporarily bring them to life to learn more magic from them. One of them thinks the Avatar is a duplicitous liar, and he's totally right, he should do something about that. Each section of the catacombs includes a trial meant to test your knowledge of a recent spell. Rock Flesh can be used to mitigate damage, Mask of Death will make enemies ignore you. Funny enough, this tutorial lesson is probably the only time you'll use most of these spells. Almost all of them are situational to the point of uselessness. Why bother putting in the effort to find reagents and make Mask of Death spells when you can just walk past enemies and it accomplishes the same thing? Grant Peace is the only continually useful one because it just nukes undead enemies. It's too bad because some of the spells are kind of cool in theory. I'd love to have more reasons to summon a golem, but you're not given many opportunities to do it or reasons to. You can only summon them at certain dirt patches, which adds another limiter on its usefulness. There are certain doors that only golems can kick down. Or open politely. Okay, why did I need you? I could have done that. Another systematic issue with Pagan becomes more prevalent as you move through all of the necromancer tasks associated with the catacombs, and that's the lack of direction. If the game is more linear, you'd think that this wouldn't be a problem, but somehow it's even more of an issue than previous Ultimas. In those games, you'd certainly be punished for not paying attention and taking notes, but Pagan doesn't really bill itself as a note-taking game. You're not supposed to go back to Tenebrae and look for clues or speak with people often. Outside of a few cases, you're given a vague objective by an NPC, and the rest is up to you. For instance, the Titans themselves. This is the game's whole through line, and it's not clear what the goal actually is. Are we killing the Titans, usurping the Titans, befriending or swearing fealty to the Titans? You're told that you need the power of the elements and left to stew in ambiguity as you try to parse the next logical step. I think this is where Mithrin is a missed opportunity, both as a character and a mechanical agent. He could have been your pal, somebody to return to and ask for guidance, a central hub of sorts. Instead, he rarely has anything to add, and you're left wondering, okay, what now? Oftentimes, you'll have to remember locked doors or previously inaccessible passages you saw. You might think you're finished with the catacombs, but there are actually a lot of branching paths you may have glossed over, paths that lead to entirely new sections of the world map. The game does a poor job of drawing your attention to critical points, and the linear structure kinda makes matters worse. There aren't many recall pads, so you periodically have to replay large sections of a dungeon that weren't particularly fun the first time around. Typically, you'll need a key, or sometimes just have new sections arbitrarily opened with a quest trigger. Your viewport is so small that it's anyone's guess where these key items might be, and critically, Pagan does not have an in-game map. It really would have benefited from one, as there's less visual clarity here than ever before. A contemporary game like Zelda: A Link to the Past featured a large world that could have been frustrating to navigate, but traversable areas and objects of interest are signaled well thanks to the game's clear visuals. In Ultima VIII, signals are lost in the noise. Doors, passages, and important items are just too easy to miss. Once you miss something, it's anyone's guess where you should start looking. Sometimes you might have an item, but its use isn't hinted at. Other times, you might need an item without knowing that you need an item. For some reason, a scroll of magical barrier dispel is the only way to unlock this door. Doesn't dispel the barrier at all. It literally just unlocks the door. Why couldn't there just have been a key nearby? There's an item called the Skull of Quakes that seems real important. In fact, there's even in-game text talking about how important it is. Should be pretty obvious when it's time to use it, right? Not exactly. The only time you can use it is combining it with this tiny little 3-pixel wide glowing spot that looks like a benign decoration peeking out from a wall. And all it does is open up a fast travel point in the middle of a dungeon. You don't need it at all, and you'd likely only figure this out by sheer chance, if not with a walkthrough. To progress past a certain point, you need to place a ceremonial shield on an altar. To know this, you'd have to have read one of many books back in Tenebrae's library and register Zealans offer their gods shields in worship as relevant information. Then, hours later, see this altar, which just looks like the coffin sprite you've seen 1,000 times already, backtrack through part of the dungeon till you find a hidden alcove containing the shield. The puzzle logic is just so wildly inconsistent and relies on you having infinite time to experiment. It's the video game equivalent of that one kid on the playground who adds new rules to the game he invented every few minutes to make sure you never have an advantage. One of the more egregious examples of this is the collection of Black Rock fragments, a quest that runs throughout the entire game. It's initially given to you by the spirits of the 3 Zealan gods, their abandoned temple found in an obscure corner of the catacombs.
Greetings, Avatar. We are aware of you and from where you come.
This is where that $25 went, and does it ever pay off in a big way?
You must become your destiny. That is not important now.
Okay, seems pretty important, but I guess what do I know?
There is nothing more we can tell you until you have found the ancient artifact.
Look, it's easy to point and laugh at him, but his name is literally Apathos. He's supposed to sound like this. Like it or not, it's a $25 performance. The Zealan gods, their powers diminished, tell the Avatar that he must embody the 5th element, becoming the Titan of Ether.
We know that the power is within you.
But it is up to you to have the courage to use this power.
Oh, courage. That's one of the 11 things I'm hypothetically a standard bearer for.
You must take the power from the other Titans. You must take their worshippers.
Okay, that's not as much on the virtue list.
Go now to find the Titans called Stratos, Hydros, and Pyros.
You shall find Hydros in her underground temple. The other 2 dwell on the surface. Farewell.
Ah, good. There's the direction I've been looking for. 2 above ground, 1 underground. Roger that. I'm on my way. It's never actually said at any point, but your goal now is to collect all 4 pieces of black rock from the Guardian's shattered obelisk. Writings within the game manual speculate that black rock is both an anathema to the Titans as well as their source of power. In fact, Pyros and Hydros have both been imprisoned by their followers through the use of black rock. Where these pieces are may not be clear, but they're going to be necessary in overcoming the Titans. While you're off playing with penny whistles and looking for magical trinkets, the situation in Tenebrae has become even worse. Bentic the Scholar has been executed for forbidden research. Our fisherman friend Devin has been imprisoned for his association with Bentic and is now awaiting execution. Looking into Bentic's research gets us into trouble, though not before uncovering an astonishing truth. Devin is actually the firstborn of the previous Tempest, making him the older brother of Mordea and the rightful heir to Tenebrae's throne. As we stand at the dock awaiting execution, the Avatar reveals this fact, angering Mordea, who attempts to silence anyone who knows the truth. It's a very satisfying finale as Devin taps into his Tempest blood, summoning a storm to slay the evil Mordea. Later, bitch. Devin, still shocked over the revelation, vows to use his powers for good and undo the evils of Mordea's reign. As traditional storytelling goes, this is some of Ultima's best and a welcome reprieve from dungeon crawling. It's even cleverly foreshadowed, with Bentic remarking earlier that Devin has potential he hasn't realized yet, and Devin saying he loves being at sea but isn't sure why. It's because he's the water guy. Lines like this feel perfectly natural in context but still hint at Devin's destiny. It's also a nice momentary break from the Avatar being treated as the chosen one. That's what the Avatar is, he's just supposed to be some guy, so it's nice to have it hammered home here. Devin was the humble fisherman turned fisher of man. He's a hero to the people. We're just a dude who was in the right place at the right time. There's an advantage in taking a more linear, story-focused approach. The player's accomplishments do feel more tangible. In previous games, you could spend hours asking for direction to a map that might lead you to your next clue. It's hard to feel like you were getting anything done. In Pagan, there are clear progress markers. You overthrow a tyrannical dictator, you become an expert necromancer. There's a dynamism to the proceedings that was explored in Serpent Isle, but leaned into here. There's a forward momentum that some of the older games lack. The rub is that despite your assisting the real badass, Pagan still revolves around you. The lack of a living, breathing world is keenly felt throughout the game. That's especially true coming off of the Ultima VII duology. In those games, the world operated like clockwork, its agents ticking away, living their lives, seemingly with or without you. Pagan is a very different beast, populated by a few mostly uninteresting individuals whose schedules and observations are about as basic as it gets. It's nice to have these epic moments, but part of Ultima's charms lie in its understated qualities, how you achieve great things and rub shoulders with great people. You become a part of Britannian history without the need for long cutscenes, monologues, or elaborate visual effects. Think of significant moments in your own life, a piece of advice somebody gave you that really resonated, a moment where you realized you were in love with someone. Probably not a lot of dramatic lighting or orchestral music. You might have been doing dishes or trimming your nose hairs. That's how history often works. The romanticism comes afterward with the benefit of hindsight. That naturalistic style really suits Ultima, where you can defeat a powerful demon, there's no cutscene or dialogue, nobody to congratulate you, you just walk on by, there's stuff to do. That aspect of Ultima feels like it's been lost, and even with all of these climactic moments, the world feels less reactive than ever. Defeating Mordea changes nothing about Tenebrae. I mean, I didn't expect Devin to be that effective a politician that suddenly everything is better, but maybe you see some jovial townspeople at the tavern declaring ding dong the witch is dead. Maybe some of the dilapidated homes in Tenebrae start getting fixed up. Maybe there are less beggars, but no, Devin's ascension to the throne doesn't create any kind of measurable change. It's just a cool cutscene for your eyes only. You'll just have to imagine how great life must be for the townspeople. This rigidity affects not only the storytelling, but also your freedom as a player. the sequential order of events stopping you from exploring the map until you're allowed, the interactivity being diminished. There's all sorts of examples of this, like the crime system. In previous Ultimas, you could steal items at the risk of being pursued by guards and losing your standing as the avatar. You had the choice of murdering anyone, from nameless peasants to Lord British himself. The only non-moral deterrent was knowing that you might be offing a quest-necessary character without realizing it. Now you can steal with impunity, unless it's something the game deems unstealable, at which point you're automatically executed by omnipotent fire guy. Same thing if you murder someone important. You're just not allowed to do anything that can affect the nuts and bolts of the story. It's a real tight leash throughout. There aren't many optional dungeons or side quests here either. One quest has you retrieving a unique weapon, the other a suit of armor, and even then calling them quests is a little generous. It's inevitable given how underwhelming rewards for exploration are. Usually you end up with fire flasks, oil bombs, fire jewels, chaos jewels, and death discs, which all effectively do the same things: take up space in your inventory and explode. Wow, imagine exploding so hard that you grow extra limbs and torsos just so you can continue to explode. There's not much worthwhile loot beyond potions and equipment, both of which are in ample supply if you're at all thorough. Pagan's currency is the obsidian, and even that is a lousy reward. There are only 2 occasions where you ever need to purchase anything, both from Mithrin, the greedy bastard. Aside from that, the vendors don't offer anything useful, carving away yet another source of potential RPG depth. There aren't even ranged weapons like bows, crossbows, or guns, which means regardless of the weapon you're using, combat is always going to feel exactly the same. It's not a long Ultima game, but it wears on you more quickly than any of the other ones. And we've only found one piece of black rock. After the catacombs, you're allowed to enter Argent Rock Isle, which is strangely only accessible by going underground using a key given to you by the necromancers. How does anyone go to get supplies here? Does everybody know how to cast the Open Earth spell? Because that's the only way to reach Tenebrae. Why does the necromancer get a monopoly over who can go anywhere? Argent Rock makes bugs a part of the equation. No, the other kind. I gotta say, I'm feeling fed up. I'm the avatar. I don't deserve to be killed by a bug. I shouldn't have to retreat. Oh good lord, it's getting closer. Not a whole lot to find through exploring, just more books. Killer Jokes, Chapter 1, Exploding Books. Ha 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 ha. The joke's so nice, they made it twice, in case it wasn't funny enough in Serpent Isle. Well, at least it killed the bugs. Except for this one. Get over here, you bastard. Cha-cha-cha! Have I mentioned how angry I am lately? The monastery on Argent Rock is staffed by Theurgists, priests who devote their lives to the Titan Stratos and her air magic. Of all Titanic magic users, Theurgists are by far the most benevolent, using powers of healing to better the lives of those on Pagan. Like necromancy, mastering Theurgy requires a life of seclusion and discipline, so there aren't many Theurgists left. Also, like necromancy, we can inexplicably learn it in 5 minutes because we're just that talented. Entering the Order of Theurgists is a matter of, once again, lying about your intentions and completing a list of chores given by the group's leader. The Theurgists like to move around the monastery grounds depending on the time of day, so you should probably carry around a giant clock. Yeah, that pocket watch Shamino gave you in Ultima VII is nowhere to be found because the Avatar is a bad friend, so you need a damn clock. It's already irritating enough having to run around looking for the right Theurgist, and would you believe me if I said that even Pagan's conversation mechanics are worse than previous games? Text just pops up above the character you're speaking. There's no name, and like I already harped on, there's no portrait. It's just less aesthetically appealing. The typeface is more readable, but it too has less character than that gothic lettering used in Ultima VII. I'll be honest, the more other people hate this font, the more I like it out of sheer defiance. Dialogue is supposed to advance automatically after a few seconds, but sometimes it just doesn't, and there's no way to tell if and when it might. So you have to manually advance it by clicking, but then, occasionally, it will actually automatically advance, but just like the split second before you click, so you accidentally skip the next bit of dialogue or make a dialogue decision you didn't mean to. That's because the game forces you to click on the text area itself to advance instead of just anywhere on screen. There's a slight delay on everything, and the cursor is imprecise. Certainly the fact that the game runs at 320 by 200 resolution has a part to play in that, but I never had this issue in the Underworlds. There's just a top coat of annoyance on everything, including the dialogue. The quality of that dialogue also varies wildly, but it's the NPC writing that suffers the most. Characters in prior games were charmingly written, especially in the Black Gate. Each character had quirks and opinions that made them endearing to listen to. You'd get to know about them, the cities they lived in, the causes that they championed, people who annoyed them, just all manner of useless but charming chit-chat. You could chalk this quality up to the involvement of author Raymond Benson, who directed the writing team for Ultima VII Part 1. Prior to this, the writing team of an Ultima game would consist of employees from programmers to art departments, anyone capable of cooking up a few lines of dialogue or writing an in-game book. This is once again the case in Pagan, and the gulf between the writing of 7 and 8 is very apparent. Pagan suffers from precedent, that being the incredibly high standards set by Benson and the dedicated writing team of 7. They skillfully wove the game's themes into the various storylines of the Black Gate without ever losing focus on the central arc of the story. Suffice to say, it was pioneering work in the very young discipline of video game writing. It's funny, it's thought-provoking, and it works on multiple levels, giving you something new to chew on with each playthrough. Mind you, this is the case despite the game having more than 5 times as many characters as Ultima VIII. It's just a case of quality and quantity. Aside from a small handful of characters like Devon or Lady Mordea, Pagan's characters are just totally forgettable. A big part of this is the limiting nature of the world, there being only one town, and as far as the people of Pagan are concerned, one issue that affects them, the tyranny of Mordea. Once that problem is solved early on, the only thing left to worry about is becoming the Titan of Ether. Your pursuits in this game are purely selfish, which makes conversations redundant. In Ultima VII, Britannia was fractured. Each town and region faced vastly different political and social issues. Pollution, the erosion of rule of law, political lobbying, racism, crime, overtaxation. There was so much going on, and different issues affected different people differently. Only through listening to a broad spectrum of opinions could you develop a full understanding of the world. Even in the less narratively focused games, every city represented a virtue and acted as a commentary on said virtue in its own way. In Pagan, everything has already gone to shit, so most people are just kind of miserable, and that's where it starts and stops. Obviously, misery is a perfectly understandable response, but the game never delves beyond it, or into it for that matter. People don't have much to say about their circumstances. Dialogue is just a means to an end, context for you to keep jumping and getting stunlocked by bonfires. Of all the mistaken lessons Origin took to heart following Serpent Isle's underwhelming performance, I would say the biggest misfire is, people don't like reading, so let's not make them do it. A great story with an excellent cast of characters could have been a real life preserver for Pagan. What Ultima VIII does undoubtedly have going for it is its atmosphere. It's been said many times over the years, and not without reason. The lonesome, twilight world of Pagan does a great job of making you feel hopeless. Delving ever deeper underground, finding dusty journals on the skeletons of lost explorers, forgotten shrines covered in cobwebs, and scenes of carnage long past. Layers and layers of ancient cities are buried, like Pagan's own histories stacked vertically. Looking out at the vast oceans that cover the surface of the realm, you also can't help but wonder what kind of aquatic beings now inhabit the submerged ruins of Pagan's once great cities. You feel truly alone. Except for the Guardian, he doesn't shut the fuck up.
Nice to send his best, Avatar.
If you have the speech pack, the Guardian chimes in every few minutes with one of like 3 stock lines. It's so tiresome.
Yes, Avatar, seek a way home. Yes, Avatar, seek a way home. Enjoying your stay on Pagan, Avatar? Enjoying your stay on Pagan, Avatar? At this very moment, Britannia burns. At this very moment, Britannia burns. At this very moment, Britannia burns.
To make matters worse, he speaks every time you save the game, and that is something you do a lot in Pagan. So get used to hearing his dumb ass constantly.
Ah, Avatar, the thrill of conquest is so invigorating.
Yeah, invigorating, I got it. Well, now that really upsets me. things aren't all bad auditorily. Pagan features a pretty solid soundtrack. The music was composed by one, forgive me Croatian community for I'm about to sin, Nenad Vugrinec, I think, who worked on audio teams for several Origin projects. This was the first Ultima game to be composed under the general MIDI standard, and the result is a much more filmic soundtrack. Pagan also has more tracks than any other prior Ultima game, with each area having its own unique theme. Previous Ultima games have had some great music, but I have to say it is pretty nice not having to hear the same 3 or 4 songs playing over and over and over again. Given the lack of visual variety, the music goes a long way here in creating an identity for Pagan's different zones. Haunting strings and choral effects stir up feelings of horror rather than the usual adventurousness and triumph. It's a good soundtrack, there's no doubt, but the focus on creating atmosphere and acting as more of a backdrop for exploration makes for some less memorable tunes. Previous Ultima games had focused tracks with a lot of melodic hooks to make them recognizable. It was necessary, given how many different sound configurations they had to accommodate for. Ultima VIII strays from this with its eerie, slow-paced tracks, making ample use of fade-ins and outs, as well as typically lacking any sort of rhythm component. Whereas there's no mistaking earlier Ultima music as Ultima music, most of Pagan's tracks wouldn't sound out of place in other horror-centric games like Blood or Phantasmagoria. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's yet another missing piece of connective tissue to the Ultima series at large. The location of Serpent Isle was made to be distinct from Britannia, but it's still recognizably a part of Ultima's world. The first track you hear is an inverted version of the song Stones, anchoring us into something familiar while guiding us into unknown territory. Pagan makes such a hard pivot in so many areas that it's often easy to forget that you're playing an Ultima game at all. Remember the virtues? Well, we have to lie to a priest now. Well, I guess again. You have to tell the Theurgists that you're interested in becoming a part of their order so you can steal their Blackrock, thereby depriving them of the ability to heal the infirmed. But I have a good moral reason. I'm trying to become a god. Each magic type has its own method of casting, and reagents don't come into play at all for Theurgy. Instead, you have to find 8 pieces of silver ore in a gray cave, which is inside of the monastery, because why not? Why not find a way to put a gray cave inside of the monastery? Then you have to turn each piece of ore into a magic amulet called a focus by going to the blacksmith and individually clicking on 8 different dialogue options and waiting. And don't you dare accidentally click the same one twice, because you will end up with multiple foci of the same type. Casting these spells is real simple. You just click the right focus and the associated spell will be cast. This does mean that you have to carry around 8 additional items in your inventory just to have access to all of your magic. Pagan, you absolute son of a bitch. At least these ones are easier to cast and marginally more useful. Restoration spells heal you, the reveal spell shows nearby secrets, sometimes. Divination tells you what time it is, so you don't have to carry around a 15-pound solid acacia wood clock in your inventory anymore. There's also Airwalk, which lets you jump further, but very situationally. There are a few things you have to do before you can become a full-fledged Theurgist. First of all, you have to climb up to the highest point on Argent Rock and try to stay balanced using the game's movement controls while wind blows you around. I'm starting to wish the wind would whisk me into a different game.
As far as I know, he left us with one witness, and she's feeling a little fragmented at the moment. This guy is unfucking believable.
There's also a mystery to solve at the cathedral. Someone has stolen a magical focus from an acolyte. It seems like a fun way to bring some of that classic Ultima investigation into the game. Maybe this is where the Monkey Island influence comes in, but unfortunately it doesn't really amount to much. It's the only time you have to use the Hear Truth spell, which, as the name suggests, forces people to speak truthfully. Even optionally, there are only 4 people in the entire game who have any additional dialogue from Hear Truth. There are so many spells like this that are just barely useful. The game doesn't really want you to mess around, sequence break, or have fun when you're not supposed to. Where's fly or freeze time or dance? If I want to make everyone look stupid or get stuck on a rooftop or kill everyone, that's my prerogative. Pagan just isn't the systems-driven game its predecessors or the Underworlds were. I mean, look at this. In other recent Ultima games, these two groups would have been fighting each other, or at least reacting to each other's presences in some way. But here they are coexisting like we're back in Ultima II, circling around Minax's tower. That was the last time we all truly got along, wasn't it? Everything just feels less cohesive. It would have been cool if spells like Hear Truth affected every NPC. It's not that tall an order, I think. There are only a few dozen NPCs in the game. It'd take like half a day for one person to write some extra dialogue, show some insights or secrets that people are keeping, make them more interesting as people. But no, outside the mystery of the missing focus, it's just not worth using. Very little in this game is, it seems. The focus was stolen by a young apprentice named Torwin, the son of Toran, who we saw executed in the beginning of the game. Torwin left home to become a theurgist, hoping to learn the extremely powerful resurrection spell. Only one person in pagan history has cast it, the founder of Theurgy and head of the monastery, Stelos, who paid for it with his eyesight. Torwin hoped that by combining restoration foci, he could create a spell powerful enough to resurrect the dead. Unfortunately, Torwin hadn't counted on his father's body being beheaded and given to Hydros. I don't know what bringing him back would look like, but I would imagine a very Pet Sematary type situation. Hearing this information, Torwin is driven to madness. Okay, the comedic timing on this whole scene was accidentally impeccable. I think what he meant to do was this. The only way to reach Stratos, the Air Titan, is to leap the gap and do some platforming. Okay, nice and easy. Nope, just gotta go up here. Shit. Just one more. Okay, I call shenanigans on that one in particular. Stratos, much like her followers, is a benevolent being, at least she appears to be. Lithos is pretty straightforward, but he's a meathead, and they don't have anything to hide.
Hold you hard to beg a boon from me, mortal. What is this boon?
See, I don't know what he's saying. He's too stupid to have hidden motives. Stratos seems like a pretty lovely titan, which makes stealing her black rock extra painful.
Without the breath of wind, many would die. Many would pay the price for your quest for power. No child I cannot allow this. Oh, dear child, you must not do this.
Sorry to jet, but I'm in a hurry. In all seriousness, stealing the Theurgist's source of healing power is probably the most canonically evil thing the Avatar has ever done, at least wittingly. These monks are the sole source of respite for the suffering people of Pagan. They spend their entire lives studying in solitude just to help others, for free and often at personal cost. We're condemning the people of Pagan to a lifetime of suffering because 3 statues, one of whom was probably on Quaaludes,
Fire, there is another element.
told us that we need Blackrock to become a super titan. We didn't even really get into specifics, they just told the Avatar to do it. I've been cracking jokes about it here and there, but it is really bizarre how little hesitation the Avatar has in acting deviously. You could make the argument that the Avatar is a reflection of the player, their avatar, as it were. But I find as the Ultima series moves forward, that argument holds less and less water. The Avatar is a character in the world of Ultima now, not an embodiment of the player. When you were capable of making moral decisions, your failings had implications. But here, it's not like you can put up a fuss. You're not even given a chance to ask questions or ascertain whether there might be a better way. Learn how many lives will be destroyed if we follow along this path. Sure, you had spells like Armageddon in previous Ultima games, but that's very clearly not canon, at least not using it. That's because you can't beat the game if you do. You have to reload a save and play out another timeline. Even more minor crimes like stealing, that's something the Avatar might do under certain circumstances. He's not perfect, he's a dude who's doing his best. Dudes who do their best screw up regularly. The point is to aim higher and reflect on your failings. That's why the Avatar is a great figurehead. He embodies that concept of grace. We need second chances. We need 3rd, 4th, and 700th chances. As long as you move forward, aiming at virtue, anchored by your principles, with humility in your heart, what more could anyone ask for? Even extending your best possible faith read of the situation in Pagan, wherein the universe will absolutely be destroyed if we don't screw everyone over as ruthlessly as possible, The Avatar is just a little too enthusiastic to yank the lever in this trolley problem. The next stop is Carthax Lake, the lair of Hydros, the Titan of Water. It's here where the wheels really start to come off, and they were already squeaking. This section was clearly truncated so that the game could release on time. Unlike Lithos and Stratos, Hydros is at a disadvantage in her dealings with the humans. She's extremely cunning and cruel, so she wouldn't hesitate to cause widespread destruction were it not for the fact that she's trapped. Long ago, she drowned the lover of a necromancer named Kalin. Furious, Kalin used his earth magic to seal Hydros within Carthax Lake using black rock sediment. Hydros promised to return the body of Kalin's lover and lend him the power of Tempestry if he agreed to not destroy her. So Hydros was left alive but trapped forevermore. It is somewhat unclear why people are so terrified of Hydros at sea if she can't be at sea. But plot holes aside, she's the most cunning of the Titans. So what do you suppose our stupid ass does?
Ah, you will assist me then. My gratitude will be boundless, mortals.
If you guessed make a deal with the most cunning Titan, then congratulations, you know what a dimwit the Avatar is. Hydros asks you to free her, and that's a really terrible idea. Even users of Tempestry know what a deceitful, misanthropic being Hydros is, and we're just assuming that she's being truthful about teaching us water magic after she's freed. This means demolishing a section of the cavern, which means another in an already long line of gray cave dungeons. It's just so repetitive at this point. The visuals, the zombies, the exploding mushrooms. My god, the exploding mushrooms. The game also exclusively uses digitized sound effects. This would have been a pretty big flex back in '94, but it ends up being another pox upon the game. The compression applied to get these files on floppy disks makes everything really muffled and scratchy. There's a sharpness to the sound effects, like for instance, these electricity traps. It's unbearable to listen to for extended periods of time. Then, sometimes when you expect sounds to play, there's nothing. It's all very weird. The soundscapes in the Black Gate and Serpent Isle are so far beyond Pagan, it's almost hard to believe. I understand that the transition to digitized sounds was necessary and bound to happen sooner or later, but it really makes me miss the hardware-based sound design in those previous games. The whoosh when you open your inventory. The charming little creak of a door opening. The ticking of a clock in someone's house. It may sound like a small point, but the average Ultima adventure is largely spent wandering the countryside. Sound is your main sensory companion in those moments. Birds chirping, waves crashing on the beach, that sort of thing. It's a big part of the Ultima personality. In Ultima VIII, it's just music and the odd bit-crushed sound effects breaking the silence. It's disruptive to the exploration, which unfortunately is pretty on-brand for Pagan. So the Avatar grants Hydros her freedom. And would you believe it? She reneges on her end of the bargain, vowing to kill Devin, the Tempest, and destroying the rest of the world.
Now I will have my vengeance upon your pathetic kind.
We're told that this is supposed to cause torrential rain, which will flood Morgalen, but it never really happens. There's a little bit of fog, I guess. The power of Tempestry is supposed to be this monumental force of nature. Where's the crashing thunder, the flooding, houses being leveled? It's actually maybe even nicer now than before we freed Hydros. It looks like a pretty pleasant day. Telling Devin about the extremely idiotic thing we just did, he tells us to find the sorcerers who practice fire magic to help deal with it. And that's the entire Hydros section. Far be it from me to complain about having less Pagan, but this segment is clearly not finished. This whole section is just a few minutes long, and you never actually learn Tempestry throughout the game. Of all the Ultimas, I can't think of any that would benefit from a water-walking spell more than Pagan. But there's also no iteration of the Avatar who deserves less to be compared to Jesus, even if it is just in a visual way. Even this short section is stretched out with minor annoyance, like having you walk along the entire circumference of Carthax Lake to speak to Hydros instead of just being able to go talk to her directly. There are no obstacles or anything here, it's just a long, silent walk in a gray cave. I miss my friends making dopey observations. Apropos of that, the lack of party members is felt throughout Pagan's runtime. Immediately, it feels like yet another big part of the series' identity being tossed to nobody's benefit, but I still wanted to give Pagan the benefit of the doubt, a chance to justify the change. 8 of Ultima's entries have been party-based. That's a part of its flavor now. Seeing your old friends bickering with each other, meeting new people, hearing advice, and catching up on Britannian politics or learning of new worlds. Even in the early games where there's barely any dialogue, there's just something about a shared adventure that really changes the game on a spiritual level, you know? My assumption is that it was inspired by Garriet's vocal adoration for Lord of the Rings. You develop a fondness for your party, you project certain traits onto them, and in-game situations become stories you remember. Maybe a party member had to valiantly sacrifice themselves to defeat a final boss or something. As the technology advanced, so did the avatar's relationships with his friends. You do have Ultima Underworld where party control would have been impossible, but even there, one of the biggest criticisms was that Underworld didn't feel like Ultima. How did they rectify this in the second game? They made your hub Castle Britannia. They filled it with recognizable friends from previous games. You can have conversations with them. In evaluating Pagan's approach, we find ourselves between a rock and a hard place. The rock is that having party members is an integral part of Ultima. It makes for a deeper game, it facilitates charming interactions, and it grounds you in a sense of purpose and familiarity. The game suffers for its lack of companions. The hard place is that having party members in Ultima VIII, as it is now, would make the game so unimaginably shit that my eyes are welling with tears and my hands are shaking just imagining it. Can you picture trying to coordinate 4 different characters jumping across moving platforms? I can't afford any more hip replacements for YOLO at this point. Even if your characters were, I don't know, winged gargoyles or something who could just float across gaps, all of the extra visual clutter on screen would make everything from movement to puzzle solving so much worse. So yes, Ultima VIII is a better game without party members, but only because it's a worse game than the game that it could have been if it wasn't worse. It's like saying, if we want to avoid type 2 diabetes, it's a lot better to just drink the small cans of Mountain Dew rather than the big ones. It's like, okay, yes, if we simply must operate within the Mountain Dew paradigm, then you are correct, but the premise itself could use some restructuring if the avoidance of chronic disease is the goal. The sorcerers are found in Demon's Crag, which, like all major areas, is connected to the catacombs. I reiterate, that is a weird bit of world design. Apparently, as development went on, the world map designed for the game box bore less of a resemblance to the in-game map. I assume turning the catacombs into Grand Central Station was the designer's way of reconciling this on a time budget, but it feels really out of place. Demon's Crag is located in Morgalen's central crater. Thankfully, I have the ketchup and mustard tunic of heat resistance, which grants me immunity to lava. Conditional immunity. You might wonder why the Avatar's spells like fire resistance didn't carry over from previous games. It's actually explained that magic works differently between worlds, so you're essentially relearning to walk when you're taught new spells here. I don't know why the Guardian is exempt from this magic rule or why spells did carry over between worlds in Ultima Underworld 2, but I'm not about to logic my way through late-stage Ultima lore. I have a passing explanation, I accept it. As mentioned, the sorcerers are devotees of Pyros, although that might not be the right way of putting it. Much like with Hydros, Pyros is an unpredictable, malicious being. Once upon a time, he caused volcanic activity that racked Morgalen in the same way that Lithos' earthquakes did. Unlike with Lithos, nobody struck up a bargain with Pyros, they just forced him to submit to their will using Blackrock, borrowing his powers. I find it kind of funny that the Guardian shattered the Blackrock obelisk to hide evidence of his arrival, and somehow on this planet that's 99.9% water, every chunk landed like right nearby and was found immediately. That Guardian's a real jackass, eh? As with the Necromancers and the Theurgists, the Avatar asks to become a disciple of sorcery in order to master fire magic. There are 2 different acolytes that'll take you on as an apprentice, a woman named Bane and a man named Vardion. Sorcerers have what's called a true name, a name only known to them, which has meaning in the ancient language of Pagan. To know someone's true name is to hold great power over them. You can use sorcery to scry on them or send summoned minions to defeat them. Bane believes that Vardion is planning to assassinate their sorcerer master, Malkir, and take his place. Vardion believes that Bane has the same motives. You can help either one of them uncover the true name of the other, which is actually kind of a nice bit of decision making here. harkens back to Underworld 2 and gives you a taste of what Pagan could have been, if only there were more time. Vardion is paranoid and irritable, while Bane is relaxed and friendly. Naturally, you want to help her out, but it turns out she's a liar, summoning a demon to kill Vardion just because he ranked above her, and she didn't like that.
I do so enjoy the cries of torment.
She plays it off as just business, which is a good way of introducing you to the inherent immorality of the sorcerers. Necromancers deal with death, but in an honest and straightforward way. Theurgists are selfless and value life. But sorcerers are just horrible people. They don't hide it. They summon demons to kill their colleagues and tell lies to coerce others. Where do I sign up? To become a sorcerer, you must first pass a test, which involves learning another new magic casting method. This one requires more reagents, but not the same reagents. An entirely different set of reagents, and they're used in a much more complicated way than necromancy. Sorcery is a whole-ass production. On top of ingredients, you need a catalyst, like a rod or a wand or a talisman, what have you. Then you need to find a giant pentagram. There's only a couple in the game. Every pentagram has 5 points. Paravolcan Z and Pa, Mesostel Pa and Z, and Aphelion. Spells need particular reagents placed at different points on the pentagram. For instance, Flame Bolt requires iron placed at Mesostel Z, Volcanic Ash at Mesostel Pa, and Pumice at Paravolcan Z. Now you place your catalyst at the center of the pentagram and say the magic word. Wait a minute, you didn't place your candles. Every spell requires a mix of red and black candles to be placed at particular points of their own. For Flame Bolt, we need red candles at Paravolcan Z, Mesostel Pa, and Aphelion, and then black candles at Paravolcan Pa and Mesostel Z. Okay, so now you can double-click the pentagram to bind the spell to the catalyst. I can't deny that this is an interesting spell system. It's pretty in-depth and really makes you feel like you're tapping into magical forces to transform these mundane objects into magical ones. It's probably the most sorcerous sorcery system in the entire Ultima series, and the bar is actually relatively high there. On the other hand, it's annoying as shit. If your ingredients or candles are a pixel out of place, the spell won't fire off and you have to go back to the drawing board. Hell, if you mix up a candle placement, the avatar accidentally summons a hostile demon. Every time you want to make a sorcery spell, you have to find a pentagram and deal with ingredients, and candles, and catalysts, and referencing written material just to know where everything goes. You need multiple bags to carry the stuff necessary for this kind of sorcery alone. It's time-consuming, and frankly, like every other kind of sorcery, it's rarely worth it. There are certainly some powerful sorcery spells, but seldom do I feel like I need anything other than my trusty beating stick. At least for Theurgy spells, all you have to do is click on your focus. Sorcery catalysts have finite charges, so if you want to actually use magic, you have to keep coming back to pentagrams to make more. Following this first trial, you're sent to the Obsidian Fortress, the home of Master Malkir and the location of the Sorcerer Testing Grounds. You meet an old friend here, Arcadian, the Demon of the Black Sword in the Ultima VII games. Strangely, he doesn't acknowledge this or remember you. I've heard it said that time flows irregularly between worlds, so who knows, maybe the events of Pagan take place before Ultima VII. The Forge of Virtue expansion for Black Gate was written and directed by Andrew Morris and John Watson, respectively. The two also worked as writers for the Silver Seed expansion of Serpent Isle, and would go on to become designers and writers for Ultima VIII. There's a strong tonal similarity between these things, especially Pagan and Silver Seed, from the apocalyptic setting to the strange new mythology. A co-worker of John Watson's described him as an Ultima lexicon. Richard Garriott, when asked about the collaborators he's most confident working with, listed John Watson before anyone else. This might go to explain why the lore of Pagan and the written materials surrounding it shines so much brighter than the dialogue itself. It provides a great launchpad for a game reluctant to launch. The Obsidian Fortress is a big dungeon that does its best to include every annoying aspect of Pagan. It's visually drab, repetitive, and full of obnoxious traps, some of which require you to spend your time making a bunch of new sorcery spells to contend. I'd love to just jump over these stupid exploding mushrooms, but for some reason I'm just not allowed. I have to walk. Why would you make a room like this? What's the challenge here? Just being annoyed trying to figure out which way you're allowed to walk? What the hell is that noise? Oh no, Richard, wasn't it enough that you made the Avatar into a scoundrel? Are we really adding children into the mix here again? Children that sound like Danny DeVito coughing for some reason? Ah well, when in Pagan. And the zombies just keep respawning. It doesn't matter how many times you kill them. Thank God for the Grant Peace spell. Now I'll just step over this body here, behind this wall. We'll just move the body. This really is the epitome of Ultima VIII as a game. Because I killed the zombie while it was behind a wall, I can't click and move it because the world geometry is in the way. Now I can't get through here. All of this going on while some zombie is shambling around in the void. Well, good thing you're trained to save early and often. After save scumming your way through the Obsidian Fortress, you're given a final trial from Malkir himself. That trial? Creating more sorcery spells. Come on, man. It's nerve-wracking enough to place these candles on the right pixel without Palpatine watching in silent judgment.
Your treasured Britannia succumbs easily.
Shut the hell up. With our metal proven, we participate in the Ritual of Flame in which Pyros is summoned.
I will feast upon your entrails first, madling.
Apparently, this wasn't even a professional voice actor. It was actually an EA executive secretly recorded responding to an Origin employee asking if they could take a bathroom break.
I grow weary of your incessant whining.
In this ritual, Malkir siphons Pyros' power, using Blackrock as a restraint. For some reason, you can't take the Blackrock chunk now. You have to wait until Malkir says, "Thanks for helping me," then goes home. Then you have to break and enter into his home and murder him when he tries to defend himself. Why? Why couldn't we just take it there? Why couldn't we just sneak in like a classic Ultima escapade? Remember the capers? Remember the antics? Now it's all like, objective completed. You've earned the trust of the man. Return to his home and shoot him. So we take his Blackrock and use it to summon Pyros, who breaks free of his restraints and starts conjuring firestorms across Pagan.
I made a mistake.
How is this supposed to help Britannia again? I get it. Pagan is the dark, subversive take on Ultima. Except we already have a very successful dark, subversive take on Ultima in the form of Warriors of Destiny. In fact, it can be argued that every mainline Ultima game since 4 has attempted to distort that game's morality in some way. Pagan was definitely a victim of timing. It was trying to appeal not just as an RPG, but a piece of adult-oriented multimedia fiction or something like that. Traditional fantasy may not have been in vogue at the time, but like it or not, it was a part of Ultima's DNA. You answer to a man named Lord British, for crying out loud. More and more with each game, the virtues of the Avatar in Ultima 4 feel incidental rather than the bedrock of the series they purported to be in the beginning. And here we are in Pagan, tearing souls from the void and getting undead to fight for us, stealing life-saving magic from innocent people, summoning a demon to help fight the other demon we accidentally summoned, trying to undergo apotheosis to become a god to the people of Pagan. And for what? To go home? To become powerful enough to stave off the Guardian for another game? Says who? And at what cost? Like, what are we doing here? Far be it from me to sound like a moral busybody, but the entire purpose of the Avatar's existence was to show that an ordinary person, through compassion, forthrightness, and bravery, can become better, and in doing so, make the world better. The Avatar became iconic not because he was born special or uniquely capable, but very specifically because he wasn't. He's an ordinary guy with ordinary problems, but herein lies the message. Take heart, for if he can do it, anyone can. The new message of Ultima is increasingly, actually only he can do it, so you probably shouldn't try. Thievery, murder, dark magic, duplicitousness, it's all permissible by the standard of whichever new moral system is relevant to the current game. Indeed, sometimes courage and honesty may not be enough to overcome. The question is, should one be courageous and honest in spite of this? Moreover, is a virtue like honesty not a timeless principle worth championing even when there's no obvious benefit to doing so? Pagan says no. The Avatar no longer grapples with his own weaknesses and limitations to overcome. Instead, he gathers magical trinkets and receives blessings from ancient gods. For the sake of power, he lies to good people and serves evil ones. His power no longer lies within. It's material, it's measurable. Somehow, despite becoming a superhuman quote-unquote hero, the Avatar is held to even less of a moral standard than when he was just a regular guy. Ultima VIII is a direct, emphatic rejection of the series' mission statement. Truth, love, and courage stand eternal. Cliché, perhaps, but clichés only become cliché often because they're so obviously true. And even so, Ultima found clever ways of challenging those moral preconceptions. This is the infinite truth of reality as revealed in the Codex. It's indelible, except it's not. It's very delible. You could argue that the subversion is the point. It's supposed to make you confront the limitations of the virtues. By having such a negative reaction to it, one reveals oneself to be immature and unwilling to engage with the work on the basis of it not being what you want it to be. I disagree. I think that Ultima VIII's corruption of the Avatar as a character and its repudiation of the virtues doesn't work because it sucks. Pagan fails to deconstruct the series' foundation because it's not really clever enough to replace those missing Jenga tiles. It undermines itself without offering an alternative perspective or even asking interesting questions. It looks you in the eyes, asks, "What if Avatar bad?" smirks like it just said something intelligent, and then cannonballs into a bottomless pit before you have a chance to ask it any clarifying questions. Ultima V interrogated the virtues and tested their integrity by placing them in a situation where not only are they inapplicable, but they're actively used as tools for evil. Somehow it did this without trivializing the virtues. On the contrary, it reinforced their conceptual strength. It's a smart and measured game. It doesn't just nihilistically dismantle the series' lore for the sake of shock value. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Limitations breed creativity. Ultima VIII has tomes worth of dialogue, fancy new 3D animation software, cutscenes, cinematic music, digitized sound, and voice acting. It's got provocative box art and a shocking introduction, and all of that has you standing at attention only to realize that Ultima VIII doesn't have anything to say. It doesn't have a core idea or central question. To take a page from Serpent Isle's Ophidian virtues, Pagan is the product of imbalance. It's uninhibited anarchy, rebellion without cause, destruction without creation. It's a desire to deconstruct out of boredom with the status quo, that being boredom with Britannia. Ironically, that makes it a pretty boring deconstruction. Quest of the Avatar spawned many children, some of them just as clever in their moral observations, others taking a very different path. It's a testament to the resilience of Ultima IV's core ideas that it remains totally unshaken by Pagan's attempted patricide. After all, you can only kill Lord British if you're smart enough. And I'm not. That's why I have an Ultima Codex page called Killing Lord British in my bookmarks. With sorcery learned, we've mastered the 4 magics, or rather 3 of the 4, but who cares, I guess. Actually, wait a minute, the entire purpose of us going to Demon's Crag was to ask the sorcerers for help defeating Hydros. We didn't mention a damn thing about Hydros. What did the Avatar forget? Anyway, on top of learning magic, we also need the Blackrock pieces before we can move on, making for a bit more questing before the finish line. Stratos' Blackrock is right beside her, but you can only see it if you cast a reveal spell. It might sound a bit cryptic, but thankfully one of the Theurgy tells you this, unaware of the magicless future that I'm going to grant him. Lithos' Blackrock is more annoying, mostly because it involves going back to the catacombs, which has so long overstayed its welcome as a dungeon. Some of the puzzles you have to solve here are a bit ridiculous too, like I can't figure out how to open this door. It sort of looks like these pillars are climbable, but I can't seem to get up no matter how hard I try. I try using a teleportation sorcery, but no, that doesn't work either. Finally, I give up and check the clue book. Apparently you're supposed to cast a summon golem spell and have it open the door for you, but you need a patch of dirt to do that. I don't see anything. What, this? This 4-pixel square at the top right of the screen? The officially licensed clue book says to do this, so it's not like it's an exploit. To be fair, it says that a key drops from a skeleton somewhere else in the dungeon, but the game has never set a precedent of enemies dropping keys or anything useful at all, so kind of a weird time to start. Hydros' Blackrock is characteristically unceremonious. You ask Devin about it and he says, "Oh, the cool rock I found while fishing? You can have it." Never underestimate a man's penchant for hanging onto cool rocks he finds in the water. With the Blackrock chunks in hand, one of Mithrin's books indicates that... Mithrin, why is there a hot, scantily clad woman with an axe in your study? Even an elderly thaumaturgist has needs, I guess. Him asking for $250 in exchange for the book makes a lot more sense now. Anyway, the book contains instructions on how to recreate the Blackrock obelisk. First, we must travel to the ethereal void where we can confront the Titans. I can't even tell you how much this simple change in color palette does to energize me. It's about time we have a dungeon that doesn't... Oh, okay, well, the ethereal void is a gray cavern. The ethereal void also has platforming. You could have at least had some fun with it, like the Qbert sections in Underworld 2's version of the ethereal void. They couldn't even be bothered to bring in a new enemy type. It's these same shapeshifters you've been seeing through the entire game. No dogs, no floating skulls. It really is just the same as every dungeon we've been in so far. It's an arduous journey through 4 different realms, each with its own fresh hells. And the Guardian. Oh man, the Guardian.
At this very moment, Britannia burns.
Was it ever a mistake to include this speech pack with the game?
I really do appreciate your plight, Avatar. Soon, I shall be able to call Britannia mine. It seems, Avatar, that you are missed here. Why, I believe I hear Lord British crying out for you now.
What a shame. The Avatar was a good man. What a rotten way to die. Of course, the final dungeon wouldn't be complete without some mazes and repetitive puzzles to solve. What the hell was that? Is Pyros taking a Titanic dump while I'm moving marbles on the tiny squares? Spare me your fool's giggle. We both know I'm about to beat your red ass for the 4th consecutive time. Slaying the Titans is a very simple matter of using the right piece of Blackrock on them. Once you beat a Titan, you move on to the next Titan's domain until you're finished.
Your treasured Britannia succumbs easily.
I seriously cannot believe that the Guardian is still yapping. This entire section is just bad. I mean, really rough. The thought process must have been anyone who'd suffered to this point of the game will have low enough standards to tolerate basically anything. I mean, of course, the cuts played a part, but you didn't have to include this. Nobody was waiting for more dungeon. You could have just had the Titans lined up like bowling pins, waiting to be knocked down, followed by end credits. Instead, it's like, how about some more suck-ass platforming before you go? Move. No! I guess the least I can say is that I'm grateful to have these mouse-based movement controls, because I can't even imagine, but... What? Why? Why did that one even happen?
You have tried my patience, and now I shall punish you.
The world would be a better place if you did. Unfortunately, the bosses are the simplest part of the void. It's everything else that's the punishment. Climb the wall. Climb the wall. Just climb the wall, please. Oh, you have to take one step away from the wall to climb it. That's not how it works when you can see the wall, but when you can't, you have to take a step away. I'm upset. With patience and persistence, the Titans are vanquished. Placing the Blackrock chunks upon the pentacle at the void center, the Avatar becomes the Titan of Ether, and the obelisk is created. The Avatar enters the obelisk, traveling to the nexus of the worlds. This celestial realm connects dimensions via seemingly endless pathways through a forest of pillars. Finally, the Avatar reaches a portal to Britannia. Upon entering it, our worst fears are realized. The Guardian's taunts, for once, were not empty threats. He has triumphed, turning Britannia into an apocalyptic hellscape, dominated by a colossus made in his image. It's a harrowing scene, and a characteristically sour note on which to conclude Ultima VIII, Pagan. Serpent Isle was a game that left me with mixed feelings. In some ways, it was just as clever, ambitious, and impressive as Ultima VII, but it was let down by a rocky development, questionable direction at points, and a time crunch. But with Serpent Isle, it's really easy to see what they were trying to do, what the game could have been. It's far more difficult to see through the haze of Ultima VIII's mistakes to the intent within. Its combat is bad, controls are frustrating, characters are few and forgettable, and exploration, insofar as it exists, is bland and unrewarding in pretty much every way. It seems like Pagan is ashamed to be an Ultima game, so it does its best impression of something that's completely different. That different thing is oddly chimeric, ill-defined ideas that never really shake hands like the coexisting systems of previous Ultimas. Pagan just doesn't come together before the credits roll. In a vacuum, there are things to like about the game. Its lore is as rich and promising as any Ultima game. Texts both in-game and out of it help to paint a picture of a strange, unfamiliar world. There's a sense of mystique here that hasn't been captured since the early Ultimas. A world covered in endless oceans, its history all but lost, inhabitants living their miserable lives near an active volcano under tyrannical rule, just counting down the days until it's all over. That sort of brooding, lonely atmosphere is captured quite nicely thanks to the game's aesthetics. The graphics, which were really impressive for their time, are well used in its in-game cutscenes. The major beats of Pagan have weight and personality to them, with exciting climactic sequences and moments of despair. Accompanied by a nice soundtrack, you start to see the team's cinematic ambitions being realized in these moments. Even though the game lacks so much of the series' character, there are sparks of that Ultima greatness felt throughout. There's probably not a single Ultima game that establishes its tone as effectively as this one. In gameplay, some of the physics interactions also survive, and they can be fun to mess around with. The quirky stories and gravestone jokes have, of course, made it unscathed, and regardless of its effect on the game's pacing, Pagan doubtless has the most fully realized magic system of any Ultima game. I also appreciate some of the quest variety, sneaking into Mordea's bedroom to steal a dagger, or dispelling magic walls to look for forbidden research. Some of the game's better puzzles utilize the physics system and platforming in ways that approach fun at times. There are a fair amount of things to do beyond combat and dialogue, and that's something I think the series could really learn from. Evidently, those good qualities have managed to shine through. Since its release, Pagan has cultivated many defenders, especially true in recent times. Retrospective opinions on the game range from "it's not as bad as people say" to "it's a misunderstood masterpiece," but tend to settle somewhere around "it's a good game, just not a good Ultima." The director Mike McShaffrey has said as much himself. I can't agree with this. I think Pagan is a bad game and a bad Ultima game. It's one thing for the heftier aspects of the game like platforming, combat, and RPG progression to be defective. And they are, for all the reasons I've already gone over at length. But even the fundamentals just aren't up to the task of bearing this game. Moving around, opening doors, engaging in dialogue, receiving items from NPCs. Basic interactions you'd take for granted are a millstone around Pagan's neck. It feels like the game is in a perpetual state of opposition to the player, like its prime directive is making sure you never have a smooth time doing anything. You need to grab the avatar by his shirt collar and pull him where you need him to go. In the process of hyper-simplifying Ultima for a new audience, they've needlessly complicated so many things that you have to do so many times. It just always feels at odds with itself. They wanted Pagan to feature more straightforward linear design. The compromise is a disjointed world connected via underground paths full of inconspicuous doors that are easily missed and opened with seemingly unrelated key items. They wanted to strip away RPG mechanics to make the game less intimidating. The compromise is a character progression system that's mostly superficial and so easily exploited that you actually have to go out of your way to play as intended. They wanted the game to be challenging, like cinematic platformers. The compromise is a game that gives you more control over the avatar's movement, but makes that control 100 times less reliable. It's a game where you just have to die over and over and over again, because you just have to. It's rooted in sadism towards Britannia, towards the virtues, towards Ultima in general. I think forcing the avatar to make evil choices in order to avoid greater evils could have been very compelling fiction, but it just falls flat. You're not choosing the lesser evil, you're being forced down a path of evil, or at best ambivalence, which is arguably not even lesser due to the lack of context you're given. The team was worried that too much reading would have players lose interest, so you're running at a deficit of relevant information for basically the entire game. The avatar's motivations and the implications of what he's doing are never really made clear. We just have to infer that this is a lesser evil situation. Hesitation is not an option, which kinda makes the avatar just look like a sociopath. The trolley problem of Pagan is underexplored. That's a problem. If we could see how Pagan suffered and benefited from our deeds, then the Avatar wouldn't need a voice, but unfortunately the world is just static. Like the earliest Ultimas, you kinda just have to use your imagination. It's the sort of game that somehow makes you miss chuckles. At the end of the day, Pagan was an experiment, one made out of perceived necessity. With the coming tide of action games and first-person shooters, it was an attempt to adapt. Hindsight, though, is 20/20, and it paints a very different picture of what they should have done with Ultima. If they just hunkered down, galvanized the existing fan base who were starving for classic Ultima, and acted as a standard bearer for hefty, complex RPGs, it would have been a glimmering light for the tired and huddled masses of D&D nerds who felt like they were being left behind. If Ultima could have just been Ultima until the tide of Myst clones and Doom clones had turned, then the series would have been in great shape, ready to ride the wave of the late 90s CRPG renaissance. Maybe Richard Garriott felt bulletproof thanks to his newfound wealth and the upward momentum the series had enjoyed for a decade, but for the first time in arguably the series' life, this Ultima game existed only to teach a painful lesson. Sometimes experiments fail. Ultima was never a perfect game. Some of them had crappy inventory systems, others had busted combat mechanics, plenty of them had frustrating dungeons. It was all a minefield between the player and the best of Ultima. But that's just the thing, when Ultima was at its best, it was easy to forgive or overlook its missteps. Ultima VIII, even at its best, only ever just becomes bearable, and it's hard to justify crossing a minefield for that. At the time of its release, Ultima VIII was primarily a source of confusion among longtime series fans. What the hell happened? The answer to that wasn't immediately obvious. In some ways, it still hasn't been cleared up. Much like with Serpent Isle, Occam's Razor points us to EA, Origin's perennial devil. Like in that game's case, the accusations certainly aren't unfounded. As the new March release date crept closer, EA told Garriott that it was time to start cutting content. As Garriott has said,
I cut it. I cut it, and cut it, and cut it, and as a result, I shipped the most incomplete, dumb, buggy game I've ever shipped.
Pagan's problems at launch stretched far beyond the platforming and lack of hotkeys. Ultima was a series notorious for its launch bugs. Against the odds, Ultima VIII showed up every prior game with a laundry list of game-breaking glitches that tied up Origin's customer service lines for weeks. Ultima VIII being a full-priced product in its launch state may have been the series' most unvirtuous moment. The game was simply not finished. This is the source of many plot-related problems in Pagan. Characters feel underdeveloped and story threads are cut short because there was meant to be more. Users of Ultima's fan-made wiki, the Ultima Codex, have uncovered use code buried in the game which points to some of the most substantial cut content. I'd mentioned Pagan's lack of reactivity, how nothing you do seems to matter or be worthy of acknowledgement. The Titans, for all of their fearsome power, have little effect on the world. Several in-game events would have remedied this. For instance, after taking the Blackrock from Lithos, he was meant to send undead minions to besiege Tenebrae and shake the land with earthquakes. It seems likely that the wrath of Hydros and Pyros would have had some effect on the game world too. It appears there was originally meant to be a haunted forest zone, an area called Vengeance Bay with a capsized ghost ship, and a sunken underwater city, the latter of which would have related to Hydros' quest, resulting in the player learning Tempestry. If nothing else, inclusions like these would have helped to expand the game's level variety, which obviously ended up in a very limited state. Some of the strange items which appear to have little or no use, like the Skull of Quakes, were meant to play a larger part in the story. There are in-game areas referenced but never explored or even retconned completely. The clue book mentions a location called the Great Isle, where magic crafters enchant items, but it's mentioned nowhere in the final game. In Underworld 2, Morgotha mentions the Guardian's Palace on Pagan. Having physical evidence of the Guardian's rule from long ago would have been a great way to increase his presence beyond his disembodied voice occasionally taunting you. But even according to the included map, this palace doesn't exist. So yes, in hindsight, there's no doubt that the team had ambitions for Pagan that went unrealized, and that is a damn shame. Even in the modest form it was cut down to, its many glitches, soft blocks, control issues, and its strange directionless pivot away from the Ultima formula instantly gave it a very negative reputation among series fans. It probably goes without saying, but Origin also did not capture a new audience for Ultima as they'd hoped. You would know this by looking at contemporary critical reception. Most of the big magazines gave Pagan a pretty good grade, and in many cases as high a score as any other Ultima. Whether these reviewers were looking to maintain their relationship with Origin, or they really saw something in Pagan that most others couldn't, we'll never be able to say for sure. But the brutal honesty of one magazine reviewer would speak for the hordes of disappointed Ultima fans. Oh yeah, you better believe that Scorpia had something to say about Pagan. Scorpia wrote for Computer Gaming World, and CGW had some of the highest circulation among relevant magazines at the time. Fairweather Ultima fans waiting for a critical take on the game would hang on to their cash until Scorpia gave them the green light. Scorpia did not give them the green light. She gave them a flashing red light with an air raid siren. Scorpia's favorite game of all time was Ultima IV, so there's no disputing her history with the series. In this review, she calls Pagan out as a shallow, repetitive, bland action game. She goes so far as to theorize that it was made for the express purpose of being easily ported to the upcoming 3DO, which I honestly hadn't even considered, but kinda holds water. She concludes her review by saying, "Overall, Pagan is a disaster and an embarrassment to Origin, Lord British, and Ultima fans everywhere. It tries to go in two directions at once and succeeds only in tearing itself apart, failing dismally on all fronts. It may have Ultima on the box, there may be an avatar of sorts in it, but that does not make it an Ultima. Given what I experienced here, I am not looking forward with any eagerness to Ultima 9. If there is one, we can only hope it will not be anything like this. We sure can, Scorpia. We sure can." An online conference was held shortly after the game's release featuring some of Ultima 8's team, including Garriott and director Mike McShaffrey. These conferences were usually a time of celebration, fans expressing their excitement and gratitude, sharing the journeys they'd been on since release. But the tone of this conference was icy in a way that neither fans nor Lord British were accustomed to. I hope you realize that it takes more than glitz and sound to make a good CRPG. Secondly, I was very disappointed with the sorcery spells.
What Origin was thinking when they implemented
There are some deliberate conversations with NPCs that are nothing but blatant and awful tries to link the game.
Too much arcade. To reformat my least compared to previous Ultima. There's almost no character development.
I thought it was the Avatar. I didn't work on my virtues up in Ultima 4 just to break every code that I followed now that I'm on Pagan.
Ultima 9 is vastly different. It was a rough showing. In fact, it was the most scathing criticism Origin had ever received. And unlike parents calling to complain about satanic box art, this feedback was coming from people who loved Ultima. One of the most damning bits of feedback levied at Pagan that day was from a fan who tried for 2 days to progress through a section of the game without compromising the virtues, believing that Ultima would never undermine itself so flippantly. Origin did their best to field concerns in the most PR-friendly way possible, but it was clear that Ultima 8 was a disaster on a scale unprecedented for Origin. The company's internal newsletter, Point of Origin, usually celebrated the release of a game with photos of the team and a relaying of reviews and sales figures. But the bulletin was oddly quiet on Ultima 8, barely mentioning its release and never following up on its initial sales target of 250,000 units. Garriott's identity as a Lord British had been a great boon for the Ultima series. On top of being good marketing, it made him the de facto leader of a nerd cult who just loved being a part of something. It was unclear where Richard Garriott ended and Lord British began. In order to declare oneself a lord, one's house his manor, and one's fans his loyal subjects, there is a necessary egocentrism one must adopt. Lord British had cool cars, a badass house, and an army of fans at his beck and call. Fair play, he earned the compliments, and he took them. He was the man who made Ultima, even sometimes to the exclusion of others who made it too. At this time, it was apparent that Garriott had bought into the mythos surrounding Lord British just as much as his ardent fans. He was, to himself and the people around him, a man who could do no wrong. What happens when a man who can do no wrong, verifiably, indisputably, does wrong?
All of the money I'd been paid had no meaning. I felt awful that I had let down so many people in my effort to be loyal and learn from EA.
Garriott has become more willing to take responsibility for Ultima's failings over the years. Yet, the protective armor of Lord British is always donned, and EA's name is invoked even when blame is taken. Certainly the game suffered at EA's hands, and there's a very good chance it could have been better with more time and a healthier workforce, but EA never pushed Ultima in any creative direction. They didn't tell Origin to turn it into a platformer, or remove its RPG elements, or tell them what the plot should be and how it should be told. These decisions were on Richard and his collaborators. Seeing the results of these decisions, and hearing Richard express his fatigue over Britannia and the people within it at this time, it's clear that Richard's heart just wasn't in Ultima, and there's no disguising that. EA or no EA, 2 years of development or 4 years of development, Ultima VIII wasn't going to be a great RPG because it was never inspired by great RPGs. The person behind it didn't play RPGs. I believe the fate of Ultima VIII was set into motion during the earliest stages of its development. That fate was gradually sealed as Lord British stopped taking part in the game's development. Thus, it was Mike McShaffrey who took the lion's share of the blame for Pagan. In the years since, he's acknowledged his own shortcomings as director. He admitted that despite the QA staff regularly complaining about problems with the game, he and the team wrote off their criticism and just moved full steam ahead. Perhaps because of Garriott's early involvement, they had more confidence than they should have, maybe. As Garriott himself put it,
they appreciated the innovations in Ultima VIII rather than bemoaning what it could have been.
The new graphics and engine were a point of pride, but that pride disguised the game's deeper problems. At the time, Lord British wasn't one to jump in front of bullets to save others, so McShaffrey became, as he put it, persona non grata at Origin.
I personally felt like I was being blamed for the mistakes, right?
He soaked up the negativity following the game's release, not only from fans, but from the people he worked with. In order to mend the game's reputation, the team proposed an improved version of Pagan. Among other things, this version would have featured voice acting for every NPC. EA quickly shot the idea down. The team instead recalibrated and began work on an expansion pack, one that would leverage Pagan's existing engine. This expansion, called The Lost Vale, would feature a large swath of new content, as well as many fixes to the existing game. The idea was to bring Pagan more in line with the team's initial plans prior to the cuts. Players had been quick to notice an impassable locked door in one of the game's dungeons. The developers teased this door as a future entryway into the Lost Vale, which players would have access to in the summer of 1994. Much like bishops in 4th century Rome, the team believed that Pagan could be redeemed, but it wouldn't be easy. They poured their time and resources into the project, finishing the Lost Vale in just 3 months. The expansion was going to take place in the titular Lost Vale, the homeland of the Zealans. The Avatar would travel to the magical Cloud City, freeing the souls of the Zealan gods, who would then assist the Avatar in defeating the Titans, bringing about a sense of closure and stability to the world of Pagan. The expansion would feature quality of life items like a bag of infinite reagents, making so much of the clutter unnecessary. There would be new spells used in puzzles too, such as the Tiny Tar spell, which shrinks the Avatar, giving him access to small cracks in the environment, like Sherry the Mouse in Ultima VI. Just as manufacturing and shipping were set to begin, EA kindly let Origin know that the Lost Vale, despite being 100% finished, was cancelled. Upper management had decided that Ultima VIII was an unpleasant chapter in Origin's history, and it would be best if everybody just moved on as quickly as possible. As fastidious as Origin was about archiving their code, the Lost Vale, tragically, didn't survive. The game's genuine prototype box has surfaced on eBay over the years, initially selling for $1,923 in 2005, and again being listed in 2014 for the princely sum of 10,000 euros, or almost $12,000. Aside from this, all we have are bits and pieces of use code, some plot documents, and a few screenshots. It was cruel of EA to wait until the expansion was done before canceling it. But it's hard to argue with the rationale of, let's just put Ultima VIII behind us. However, Mike McShaffrey didn't agree, and he was tired of sweeping Pagan under the rug. A member of the QA staff named Harvey Smith had made a comprehensive list of everything wrong with Ultima VIII. He and McShaffrey approached Garriott with this list. Garriott greenlit a patch with no hesitation. By McShaffrey's reckoning, he and Smith fixed about 110 major bugs. This was also the patch which allowed for cursor-based jumping controls, which was recognized as a huge change in the Ultima community. The damage had largely been done, and most things were well beyond fixing. Still, Smith and McShaffrey's patch was the single most important factor in salvaging Pagan's reputation. When discussing the game to this day, one has to make a distinction between pre- and post-patch, almost like they're different games. It may not have turned Pagan's fortunes around, but it didn't hurt, and it was a promising start in the game industry for young Harvey Smith. In spite of these small victories, the mandate from EA was clear. They didn't want big games like Ultima. As Garriott wrote in his memoir,
"They wanted very small games, and a lot of them. Instead of working on a $10 million game that would take years to make, they wanted games that would be produced in 2 months for 100,000, allowing them to spread their investment risk."
While it may seem like a dark time for Origin, the world outside of Ultima actually looked pretty bright, though you wouldn't know it by looking at the lean months following Ultima VIII. During this time, Origin was publishing another game from their frequent collaborator, Looking Glass Technologies. It was a game that had producer Warren Spector's full attention, and a likely reason for his absence in Ultima VIII's development. In fall of 1994, thanks to Looking Glass, Origin's name would yet again be attached to one of the greatest video games ever made. System Shock was the product of good old reliable Origin burnout. As a result of Underworld 2's brutal development cycle, the staff at Looking Glass were tired of Ultima, just like everyone else it seemed. They wanted to take the lessons learned from Underworld 2's development and apply them to something else. It didn't matter, just no more Ultima. So they chose a setting that couldn't be more different from Britannia, the cold vacuum of space in a cyberpunk future. Specifically, Citadel Station, a satellite hijacked by a rogue AI called Shodan, one that increasingly sees itself as a god and you, the player, as an insect.
Humanity is on the verge of a new era. I, Shodan, am its new god. And you, my children, are my avenging angels.
The RPG systems of Underworld have been greatly simplified. There's no leveling, no classes, no attributes. There's just you, the nameless hacker, and the horrifying reality you're forced to contend with. The resulting game is a real statement piece from Looking Glass. System Shock features the recursive, multi-tiered world design of Underworld 1 and the clever environmental storytelling of Underworld 2. Frustrated by how limited the conversation systems of Underworld were, the team made the bold decision to have no NPCs at all. Through the power of the CD, the plot is dictated in audio logs and emails found during your mission. The game is full of voice acting, which plays back without interrupting the action.
Oh God, I can see through my own body. There's another virus in the grove. God, let me die. Please.
You're given direction, story context, and hints, all cleverly weaved into the sordid fates of the audio log's authors. You can't help but root for people that you've never met and are probably already dead.
This is the engineering party. We've made it to the reactor level, and I've got a schematic of the area. Now we've just got to set the reactor to self-destruct, get back to Althea and the others, and get out of here.
Building on top of the foundation set by Underworld, System Shock also features a new renderer, allowing for unprecedented levels of control over your character. A contemporary like Doom 2 wouldn't even let you look up and down. System Shock had vertical aiming, walking, jumping, running, crouching, crawling, peeking around corners. You could take control of an avatar in cyberspace to open security doors and shut down cameras. You could carefully aim your gun anywhere on screen, tossing grenades and watching enemies go flying from simulated explosions. You can pump yourself full of performance-enhancing drugs or utilize implants to see behind you, activate energy shields, monitor your vitals, or utilize infrared sight. All of this in a beautifully non-linear environment. Citadel is the best of all worlds as far as Looking Glass's level design. It was one of the few games at the time to utilize Super VGA high-resolution display running at 640 by 480 pixels. It was sophisticated beyond anything Origin had developed or published. While Ultima was divesting itself of its complexity, System Shock was moving full bore into a level of depth that the humble FPS had never seen. Despite taking an inverse approach to Pagan, both games suffered from the same problem on release, that being one of expectation. The average Ultima fan wanted rich, multi-layered systems in their RPGs. The average shooter fan wanted their games to be straightforward, fast-paced experiences. The primary difference is that Ultima VIII was a mess, while System Shock was executed extremely well. It just struggled to find an audience. The game reportedly sold more than 170,000 copies over the next 5 years. Not a financial failure per se, but less than expected, and well less than deserved. The game had a modest production cost though, thanks to its small team, who were willing to provide voice acting for the game. And boy does it ever sound that way.
Paul, it's not just Gamma. There's biocontamination leaks all over the station. And there's been a general recall of all environment suits. If you want one, try Ed Guerin. He's been working on the reactor.
Part of its charm. The team was directed by Doug Church, a man for whom Warren Spector had deep respect. When Spector joined Origin back in '89, he described his creative partnership with Garriott as simpatico. As LB drifted away from active development to run his business, Spector found that same kind of creative compatibility with Church. Although he was producing a number of projects at any given time for Origin, Spector especially relished the opportunity to work with Looking Glass. Everything that Church, Neurath, and the rest of the crew were doing over there was just downright inspiring. Unfortunately, it was the last time that Looking Glass Technologies and Origin would ever work together. Hell of a swan song though, and a jewel in the crown of both companies. Blockbuster or not, it would have been a high note to end 94 on, but Origin had one game left, and this one was for all the marbles. For Wing Commander 3, Chris Roberts leveraged EA's resources and the capabilities of the CD-ROM to realize his aspirations. Wing Commander had always emphasized dramatic storytelling, so it was a no-brainer that the third entry would feature FMV starring real-life actors. To that end, EA foot the bill for an impressive cast, including Tom Wilson, John Rhys-Davies, Malcolm McDowell, and Mark Hamill as our hero, Maverick. The production team rented an 8,000 square foot soundstage in Los Angeles where principal photography took place. Hollywood screenwriters were brought in to pen the game's script, which resulted in 200 hours of professionally shot footage prior to editing. Origin's 3D artists would then employ the technology they'd used to create Ultima VIII's sprites. This time, they would be animated and chroma keyed, like a movie. With development costs hovering around $4 million, Wing Commander 3 Heart of the Tiger was not only Origin's most expensive game, but the most expensive computer game ever made at the time. With games like Gabriel Knight starring Tim Curry coming out at the same time, there was a real novelty surrounding movie-like games with real actors. Between this and the huge budget, Wing Commander 3 practically marketed itself. Despite being the surest win that Origin had ever bet on, $4 million was a lot of money. The game, of course, also had to be out by Christmas, because every game had to be out by Christmas. Even when they weren't out by Christmas, they still had to be out by Christmas. With teams in both LA and Austin working on this unprecedented production, it was another season of ruthless crunch and one hell of an undertaking. Wing Commander 3 Heart of the Tiger launched in December of 1994, quickly becoming the most successful game that Origin had ever made, and to this day, one of the best-selling computer games of all time. These days, it's easy to look back at the grainy, green-screened video and see it as cheesy, and it is, but at the time there was nothing like Wing Commander 3. Video games had long stood in the shadow of Hollywood, but Heart of the Tiger managed to bridge the gap between the two. The in-game graphics utilized the SVGA high-resolution mode, much like System Shock, making for an impressive visual leap from the previous game. Wing Commander 3 is a fairly simple game, even a bit repetitive at times. This is mitigated by the cinematic storytelling, with all the twists and turns, rivalries, and betrayals you'd expect from a sci-fi TV show, but with the added benefit of letting the player make choices along the way.
The difference in our rank is a formality. We both know who's better in the cockpit.
Yeah, we do.
It quickly became Origin's flagship game, being ported to CD-based consoles like the 3DO and Sony's brand new PlayStation, a dark horse that seems to have a promising future. Ports to the Atari Jaguar and Sega Saturn were also planned, though ultimately cancelled. Wing Commander 3 was a victory for Origin on two fronts. First of all, it was proof that EA's faith in Origin was not misplaced. They had delivered as big a hit as anyone ever could have hoped for. Second of all, it allowed Origin to, at last, make some inroads into the console market. The 3DO version in particular acted as the console's killer app, proving you didn't need an expensive computer to get the Wing Commander experience. For whatever being the 3DO's killer app was worth. After all the hype and Origin's plans to bring their work to the 3DO, the system was floundering. The PlayStation, meanwhile, was shaping up quite nicely, and Nintendo was gearing up to compete with these CD-based systems. Their Ultra 64 still wouldn't be out for some time, but the Super Nintendo continued to enjoy a large install base. Origin had attempted to capture some of the SNES market, again and again. They hadn't found success yet, but that didn't stop them from trying. Their final attempt to ride the wave of Nintendo's popularity was Ultima Runes of Virtue 2 on the SNES. Runes of Virtue 1 and 2 had been released on the Game Boy. They were mostly unremarkable. Zelda clones which come nowhere close to that series' heights, but inoffensive. If nothing else, they didn't actively taint the Ultima name, which is more than can be said for some games. Runes of Virtue 2 received an enhanced port to the Super Nintendo in late 1994, a little less than a year after the Game Boy version. The game, like other console versions of Ultima, was published by Japanese conglomerate FCI and developed by Origin's in-house console department. It was largely the same small team in charge of the SNES versions of Ultima VII and Savage Empire. If you're familiar with those games, then you'll know what to expect from Runes of Virtue 2. Perhaps the nature of handheld gaming makes the spin-off series' flaws more forgivable, but Runes of Virtue did not translate well to the SNES. The premise of the game is that the Black Knight, you know, that classic Ultima character that we all know and love, is bored and decides to kidnap the mayors of Britannia's various cities. It's up to not the Avatar, but one of his friends to save the day, giving you an option of which character to play as. Shamino, who's never looked worse, is equipped with his iconic hamburger. You've also got Mariah, Yolo, who's like 15 years old here for some reason, and Dupre, who's alive here for some reason. There's not much by way of compliments to pay Runes of Virtue 2, but here's my best attempt. Some of the game's still frames feature some pretty nice pixel art. There are also a few original music tracks that are surprisingly good. Unfortunately, you won't hear them much because the dungeons, where almost all of the game takes place, are silent. The gameplay is a disaster. The central gimmick of the design here is that the dungeons are full of malicious tricks meant to frustrate and confound you. We've already talked about how unfair some of Ultima's secret doors and traps can be, but Runes of Virtue 2 plumbs horrid new depths. The dungeons here can take hours of trial and error to complete. Enemies infinitely spawn, there are hardly any invincibility frames when you take damage, invisible teleporter squares will warp you out of the dungeon and force you to restart. You're meant to guess which inanimate objects will open doors across the dungeon when touched, and which rooms are full of traps that'll kill you instantly when you enter them. Listing all of the ways in which this game falls flat is so far beyond the scope of this segment, it might be a story for another time. The silver lining is that Ultima wasn't on the radar for most Nintendo fans, so it's not like the game could really damage the series' reputation. After the game presumably failed to generate sales, Origin finally let sleeping dogs lie and stopped making these weird console Ultimas. Back on the PC, Origin was continuing to work on more cost-effective games at the direction of EA. While Pagan's team was devastated by the game's reception, the lead programmer of Pagan's engine, Tony Zurovec, saw something worth salvaging in its wreckage. Zurovec saw the deluge of first-person shooters, with all of his Origin colleagues chasing that wave, and looked to an unlikely inspiration: Wolfenstein. Not Wolfenstein 3D, which was hot stuff at the time, but Castle Wolfenstein, which was not. The original Apple II Classic from 1981 is primitive by today's standards, but featured an unusually high degree of decision-making back when it was released. Enemy bodies can be looted for keys and ammo, you can sneak around rather than just blast your way through a level. You can shoot doors or chests to open them more quickly, but the sound may attract the attention of nearby guards. As action games from 1981 go, it was about as ambitious as they came. Zurovec felt its ideas represented untapped potential. He penned a design document, it was greenlit, and Crusader No Remorse was born. Depicting a dystopian future in which the World Economic Consortium has absolute control over the planet, you play as a Silencer, an enhanced super soldier working for the tyrannical WEC. The Silencer begins working with a resistance outfit, undertaking dangerous missions to infiltrate and sabotage his ex-employer. The game is powered by a souped-up Ultima VIII engine, once again taking place from an isometric perspective. Gameplay-wise, though, it's a completely different beast. Crusader is an action game, but it's a smart one. The player is often able to move unseen, hacking computers and piloting combat mechs to do their dirty work for them. You have to find key codes and open doors and use high-tech tools to navigate these complexes. Of course, you also get to blast everybody to pieces, and that's pretty fun too. It's no surprise that Warren Spector acted as producer on this project, as it has quite a bit in common with System Shock. That starts with the complexity of its controls. You're given a lot of movement options like walking, running, sidestepping, crouching, combat rolling, what have you. You can also perform complex actions like setting and detonating bombs, remote controlling spider bots, and looting enemies for ammo and money, which can be used to purchase weapons between missions. The barriers to entry are the keyboard-based tank controls and the lack of a scrolling camera, both of which are deviations from Ultima VIII. The tank controls are clunky at first, but once you get used to them, you can exercise far greater and more responsive control over your character than you could in Pagan. You'll be diving for cover, shooting out security cameras, and sinking hundreds of bullets into the backs of unsuspecting civilians in no time. The character's pivot point is slightly behind their center mass, which makes rotation and movement feel a bit awkward. The camera snapping also holds the game back. Zurovec insisted that the game utilize 640 by 480 Super VGA graphics, more than doubling the resolution of Ultima VIII. It makes for a great-looking game that pops with detail and color. Despite the setting being mostly industrial, modern complexes, Crusader is somehow more colorful and vibrant than Pagan. Gotta love your candy apple red Silencer suit. This high resolution made smooth scrolling impossible on existing hardware. This means the position of the camera is constantly updating. It's not ideal. Later ports to consoles did allow for smooth scrolling, but these ports had their own issues. The game's level design is fantastic, with thoughtful enemy patrol layouts, traps, puzzles, and rewards for exploration. Between missions, you're given a chance to relax at Resistance HQ. Here you can purchase new gear or just take some time speaking to your distrustful comrades. There are a lot of charmingly corny FMV sequences serving as the game's dialogue. Crusader remains one of few games from this time that's made better through its use of FMV.
Hey, I do it for free, but a man's gotta pay his people, you know? Also, I gotta take care of my little baby. Baby.
Finally, the sound in general is excellent, especially the music. Because of its cheap development, Crusader ended up generating the single highest return on investment in Origin's history, selling over 250,000 copies and spawning a sequel, Crusader No Regret. It's more of a standalone expansion pack than a full-blown sequel, but it was received similarly well. Its opening level is also set to a medley of techno Christmas music. Not really relevant to anything, I just wanted to mention it. You can add No Regret to the very small list of Christmas games. The Crusader games remain cult classics. They served as both a way of extracting a jewel from Pagan's remains and as another vote of confidence for EA. It's hard to imagine that all of the spider bots, keypads, security cameras, and sneaking around didn't have an impact on Warren Spector, just a little bit. With the brakes now pulled on Ultima, it seemed like the medieval fantasy CRPG was deader by the day. Origin was focused entirely on sci-fi titles like Wing Commander, System Shock, Crusader, and Bioforge. Released in early '95, Bioforge was the product of programmer Ken Demarest's imagination. Demarest had been working with Origin for half a decade, which, given the quick turnover, made him a veteran of the Force. The idea came to him during the development of the Black Gate. It seemed to him that the characters didn't feel real, and because of that, the drama fell flat. He also felt as though Ultima's unwavering commitment to freedom was impeding its storytelling. Without careful direction, players would lose their momentum, and the intensity of a story would fall apart. In many ways, his ideal game was the complete antithesis of Ultima's design. He wanted his story brought to life with voice acting, cinematic sequences, and plot beats specified by a writer. The CD-ROM gave him everything he was looking for, and his small team would work for 2 years to bring his ambitions to life. The result was Bioforge, a very strange game indeed. Before interactive movie was a pejorative, it was a marketing term, and an effective one. But Bioforge wasn't nearly as limiting as most FMV-driven games of the time. You have full control over your character. In fact, as seems to be the theme of today, you're given granular control, making the game kind of hard to play at first. It plays like an action-adventure with a fixed perspective, similar to the 1992 game Alone in the Dark. Unlike that game, Bioforge features fully texture-mapped 3D polygons thanks to its rendering tech. Origin was now very familiar with 3D Studio, and it showed. The models are detailed beyond almost anything else from that time, and though the game only displays in 320 by 200 resolution, the pre-rendered backgrounds look surprisingly great. Origin may not have had infinite resources like EA did, but the studio had a well-deserved reputation as a tech powerhouse. They were always pushing the envelope of what was possible in a game, whether it's cutscene and audio engine, its pioneering 3D tech, or its early adoption of voice acting and FMV. Origin had always existed at the cutting edge, and that continued to be true. Bioforge utilized the Flock of Birds motion capture system. This made for extremely lifelike movements and animations, all in real time. It was hard to believe how far we'd come in just a couple of years. Bioforge impressed on its release, mainly thanks to its technology. While commendably weird and influential from a technological perspective, Bioforge has largely slipped through the cracks over the years. It was just a bit too different to be a smash hit. If it had released a few months prior, it probably would have made a bigger splash. But early '95, when Bioforge launched, was the same window of release for games like Star Wars, Dark Forces, Descent, and MechWarrior 2. There was no shortage of great-looking, innovative 3D games at this moment. Meanwhile, as the CRPG floundered, the real-time strategy game was exploding. 1995 saw the release of 2 mega hits, Command & Conquer and Warcraft 2: Tides of Darkness. Combined, these games sold somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 million copies within a 5-year period. So people without the requisite hardware for fancy 3D games and a hunger for complexity didn't really need the CRPG, they had the RTS. A major reason for the dominance of this genre was the increasing accessibility of network play. Games like Doom had pioneered the deathmatch, particularly over a local area network, but it even allowed for online matchups made via the dial-up service Dwango. Sure, it tied up your phone line and pissed off your parents, but the concept of playing a game with someone who wasn't even on the same local network as you was beyond innovative. Even on a LAN network, lugging your PC down to a friend's place to play some deathmatch was a blast. You didn't need to cut your screen in half like you did with console games. So multiplayer gaming, both via LAN and dial-up services, was becoming the scene of yet another gold rush. Command & Conquer capitalized on this by including 2 discs, each of which represented an in-game faction. One, the Global Defense Initiative, the other, the Brotherhood of Nod. In an absolutely ingenious play, Westwood Studios allowed for either of these discs to be given to a friend. In this way, one copy of the game gave 2 people a chance to play against each other in a network match. Warcraft 2's competitive team-based modes and custom map editor for multiplayer gave it a similar appeal. With Doom 2 further streamlining network play, multiplayer was very quickly becoming a standardized feature, yet another reason for publishers to abandon the CRPG. As Origin put the finishing touches on Ultima VIII's patch, Garriott himself quietly inserted a text document into the folder containing the update files. This document, called fans.txt, acted as, well, about the closest thing Ultima fans would get to an apology. Garriott does justify the game's simplicity in its role-playing by stating that previous Ultimas had become too big to the point of alienating prospective players. But he also acknowledges the complaints regarding platforming, inventory management, and the game's story. It may not have been much by way of recompense, but in a world where big businesses have entire departments dedicated to avoiding responsibility, it was proof that Origin still cared about their fans. One can't help but wonder if fans.txt was Richard's way of going behind EA's back, talking directly to the people who made Ultima what it was. In light of the industry's state where one day's cutting edge was the next day's irrelevant, it becomes easier to, at the very least, understand why Ultima VIII ended up the way it did. A team under massive pressure, led by a new director, using new development tools, trying to play catch-up with an industry that was evolving so quickly that it was barely recognizable. Garriott rushed to discuss Ultima IX, publicly promising that this time, Warren Spector would be in the director's chair. Having now produced Ultima VI, both Underworld games, and Serpent Isle, Spector was a fan-favorite contributor to the series. He was someone with vision and drive, whose presence at Origin had correlated with great things. Garriott knew his name would inspire confidence, and so it was thrown out to fans while Pagan's body was still warm. Yet, Spector had his own grievances with EA, and they were becoming more apparent. In the early days of EA's acquisition, Spector was the first to defend them. When an interviewer asked about EA, Spector responded, "I don't know what lies ahead, but for now, the changes have only been good." That was clearly no longer the case. As EA's trust in Origin waned, Spector said they began, quote, taking a firmer hand with us, integrating us into the machine in subtle and not so subtle ways, and that's when things started to get a little less pleasant. Spector was still interested in pushing the medium, and this philosophy ran counter to EA's. For Origin, a modest return on a small avant-garde project would have been good news. For a massive company with minimal risk tolerance like EA, it made way more sense to axe those games and turn them into tax write-offs. Don Matrick approached Spector and told him to start modeling his career on that of Chris Roberts, to think in terms of mega hits rather than boutique projects. At the same time, EA was slashing Origin's budget. By Spector's reckoning, it was always his projects that were killed first. At the beginning of '95, Spector hosted a semi-satirical marketing tape called Vested Interest Productions. In it, his already barely disguised resentment toward EA bubbles to the surface as he showcases Origin's 1994 catalog.
In fiscal year 1995, the VIP Group made significant contributions to EA's plan for absolute global domination. Join me, won't you, for a nostalgic look back at our last 12 months. System Shock is an immersive science fiction adventure that pits the player against the ruthless computer system Shodan. To me, it represents man's eternal struggle to show more profit in this fiscal quarter, but that's just my take on it. Different people come away finding different things. But what of the bigger question? How will mankind react to living in a world that has been completely dominated by Electronic Arts? They'll be too busy playing the games we have coming out in fiscal '96. They won't even notice.
It was a reflection of the general sentiment felt by Origin's employees. Fiscal quarter this, market appeal that. Aside from a few blunders, this was arguably the most creative period in Origin's existence. Yet, there was no time for celebration, and seemingly no reason for it. When a project wrapped, it was on to the next. The crunch was inevitable. Since Warren Spector had joined Origin back in 1989, he worked as producer on 15 different games, making him not only one of Origin's most prolific developers, but also its most valuable. When a project needed someone at the helm, even if it was destined to hit an iceberg, he was there to provide direction. Spector has said many times over the years that he joined Origin to, quote, change the world.
The most amazing thing about it was, we actually thought we were going to change the world. That we were doing things that no one else was doing. I mean, games that had an ethical dimension or cinematic qualities, or the first real-time 3D first-person fully texture mapped world anyone had ever seen. I mean, it's crazy what we were doing. And I don't want to say that Origin changed the world, but if you look around, games certainly have, and I think we were a little part of that.
In Richard Garriott, Spectre saw a like mind, one of precious few individuals who believed in the power of the medium as he did, that there is merit in gaming as interactive cultural texts, as uniquely powerful storytelling tools, as art. Changing the world may come across as dramatic or hokey to those of us who don't see the world like Spectre does, but in 1989 it was not self-evident that games were art. To most, including the people who made them, games were toys. It took people like Spectre, like Garriott, to challenge those preconceptions, to make players reflect on their actions by creating dialogue using mechanics as the medium. Warren Spector changed the world at Origin Systems, and in 1996, seeing the writing on the wall, he left Origin Systems to find like-minded people with whom he could change the world again. As it happens, ex-Origin Systems employee John Romero had recently become an ex-id Software employee. He'd left his own company to start a new venture in the form of Ion Storm. Spectre, who was now working full-time at Looking Glass, was on the knife edge of signing another contract with Electronic Arts when Romero kicked down the proverbial door and threw a blank check at Spectre. Proverbially. Come work for me at Ion Storm and make your dream game. No corporate influence, no managerial interference, just you, a team of your choosing, and your wildest dreams manifest. A few years later, Spectre and his team made yet another of the greatest games of all time. I know, but I have to keep saying it because it keeps being true. 1996 continued to be a year of transformation at Origin as more alumni left for greener pastures. People like Dallas Snell. Snell was known as a hard-ass by many of Origin's staff, but his managerial prowess wasn't up for debate. Snell made the impossible possible, sometimes at great cost to himself and others, but games were shipped. He was the linchpin of both Origin and EA, and now he was gone. At EA, Robert Garriott's life had become an endless cycle of flying between Origin's HQ in Texas, EA's HQ in California, and his own home in New Hampshire, where his wife would see him just 1 week per month, 2 if they were lucky. It was all too much, and so Robert retired, leaving Richard as the lone Garriott brother in the game industry. More keenly felt, perhaps, was the exit of Chris Roberts. It wouldn't be an overstatement to say that Roberts had kept Origin afloat for the past 6 years. But with great financial success comes responsibility and expectation. In a '97 interview with Next Generation magazine, Roberts cited EA's rigidity at Origin as the primary reason for his departure. He and Crusader director Tony Zurovec left Origin to found Digital Anvil Studios. Eventually, Roberts would also look to make the game of his dreams, proving to this very day that some dreams are loftier than others. Around this time, Origin also lost longtime Ultima contributor and Bioforge director Ken Demarest, Ultima VIII director Mike McShaffrey, and artist Denis Loubet, one of 3 people who can honestly claim to have been a part of Ultima's development from the very, very beginning. This may paint a picture of a lonesome Origin HQ, but truth be told, it was just as bustling as ever. The only difference was its makeup. It had always been a youthful place, for youngsters who didn't mind sleeping on the floor, who didn't have spouses at home to disappoint, or children whose piano recitals they'd have to miss. Perhaps a changing of the guard was inevitable. Besides, there was no time to mourn the company's old ways. As Garriott himself said in the company's June 1996 newsletter,
I actually have more faith in the team we've built and in the products we just released, or now have in the works, than I have in many, many years.
Wing Commander 4 was already under development, Chris Roberts' involvement be damned. As mentioned, Origin had been quick to divert attention to Ultima IX following Pagan. They promised a return to everything that the fans loved. Garriott was given his non-Britannian Ultima, and it served as a reminder to never take home for granted. Early footage of Ultima IX was shown off in promotional materials. Garriott went out of his way to mention all of the logistical improvements to this entry.
Some of the major changes we're doing this time is we're, of course, doing what we call going back to basics in the sense of Ultimas 4, 5, and 6 from a storyline standpoint. Very much virtue-oriented, very Britannian Ultima. And yet we're also changing the game very dramatically. We're, for the first time and since the beginning of the series, we are not a tile graphic game. In fact, we are doing a degenerate form of 3D called orthogonal.
This time there was a comprehensive story document, a closer relationship between developers and testers, and of course, glorious 3D graphics. No bugs, no plot holes, just classic Ultima greatness. The relationship between Ultima fans and Origin had soured a bit, but Garriott and his team were prepared to make good on their promises. If Ultima had anything left in the chamber, it was crucial that the trigger be squeezed as soon as humanly possible. Lord British gave a tentative release date of the 1996 holiday season. There was no reason to suspect that anything would come between the fans and Ultima 9. But if there was a reason that such a thing were to occur, it had better be a damn good one. Next time on the Ultima Retrospective.